Okay, let me see if I get anything. Looks like we are live.
All right.
It's black screen on my end so far.
Okay. Wait, it's black screen?
Okay.
Oh.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Human Reaction Podcast, your weekly source for independent commentary on cultural news and politics. Tonight is a very special episode. We're going to be live streaming the vice presidential debate between J.D. Vance and Tim Walz. The debate should start up here in about 15 minutes. In the meantime, David, how are you, sir?
Doing okay. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm
Good,
doing
man.
great. Glad to be here.
Yeah, me too.
The late night episodes are always a little bit fun, you know?
Yeah. I had a great time on the last debate that we did. A lot of fun. We were in an undisclosed location for that one, and it was a very different vibe, but had a good time with everybody in the chat.
Well, there's a lot of censorship going on at the time. We wanted to make sure we didn't get canceled or swatted or anything like that. So we moved studios just for that, just to be sure. And luckily, the threats have subsided, I think. So we're back to normal.
World War III almost happened today, apparently. So
I mean, I think it's currently happening. Wouldn't you say it's currently happening?
It's a slow step, man.
I mean, so Iran just hit Israel with a bunch of ballistic missiles that got through the Iron Curtain, which is not typically what happens.
Iron Dome.
Iron Dome. Sorry,
That's a different thing.
Different
but yes,
Iron
yeah,
Thing.
right.
different war, different world war, really.
So
I know the difference.
if you recall our coverage of the last tit for tat between Iran and Israel after the assassination bombing, there was a bunch of rockets got fired. A lot of them got shot down. A lot of the theory that we advocated was that these are probably like their reserve rockets, their older rockets, and that a couple did get through, and those might have been their hypersonic, special, awesome Russian rockets. And this time it looks like it was the Russian rockets. Like they really went after them. They couldn't shoot down hardly any of them. It went from a success rate of like 95% to a success rate of maybe like 10 or 5%.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So, but there was also seems to be targets that were largely picked because they struck the ground a lot that didn't kill anybody.
Oh, interesting.
So there's no reported death toll so far.
So is that maybe just them trying to show that they can, just to kind of threaten?
Another part of an escalatory spiral. But I mean, it's really quite amazing just how restrained Iran is being. Well, amazing and not amazing, right? Amazing from the point of view of like they're bombing you, they're bombing your proxies and allies, and you're just shooting rockets at them, knowing that they're not going to kill anybody.
Yeah. No, that's wild.
Iran's kind of always been that way, though. It seems like every attack, they hit some strategic point that they give a bunch of warning for ahead of time or whatever, and then they make some boisterous statements for the people back at home, while then also being diplomatic for the people outside. Like that tends to be how they operate.
But what we're questioning is are we hitting a new place, right?
Yeah.
Where it's basically saying, no, you're not going to be able to do overflights over Lebanon forever. Because one of the things that was hit was an airbase, and it probably destroyed the airbase.
Wow.
So if they can destroy Israel's airbase at will, that's a much bigger escalatory like signal than we've seen before.
Well, you know who's excited? Lindsey Graham.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I
And
bet
you know
he
who
is.
else is excited? Everyone who funds Lindsey Graham, i.e. the military-industrial complex,
Well-
because that's a lot of jets to have to replace. Isn't it?
Yeah, well, I don't even know if they destroyed any jets. It's just the runway. But that's it. And you got to ask, like, these hypersonic weapons, right? So the big military theory was that we were entering a new era where defensive weaponry was becoming so strong, long-range rockets weren't going to work anymore. And the drones, while they might be effective over neutral territory or like in combative areas where it's like a matched one for one, your defensive, your ability to actually project power remotely was being diminished by these remote battery systems that were so good at projecting like the trajectory of something and then intercepting it. That might not have been true. That might have been a whole false paradigm with these hypersonic weapons.
Kaylee's saying that I'm quieter than you guys.
Well, I think you need to project a little more. It's
Well,
more in the,
it was because I did that yell test, and I think you cranked me down.
I might have. I might have.
Mic control. Ah!
All right, well, let's pivot to this debate. It's coming up here soon. We've got about 10 minutes left before it kicks off.
I do think foreign policy is one of the most interesting parts of this debate. I really want to know what happens here.
Yeah.
Because the incentive, there's a crazy set of incentives right now for Vance. He has obviously the AIPAC funding base, and The America First has not decided where they're at on Israel in any substantial way. And then the other side, you have all the flooding all across rural America in the East right now, and a lot of natural disasters that are striking simultaneously. So, like, the America First story is at conflict right now.
It's huge. And has Kamala yet visited the Southeast where the devastation has happened? Do we know if the administration has any presence there yet at all?
Last I saw was no, and I was kind of perusing Twitter today, but I don't know how reliable that is. So
Yeah, I saw something about a plan for her to visit someplace, but I don't really know.
Has Trump been there to deliver McDonald's yet? Because it feels like kind of a thing he does.
Well, Cedric's asking in the chat here, who's going to warmonger against Iran the most this debate?
That's a really good question.
probably Vance, honestly.
I think
He has a lot of incentive to, but on the other
Yeah.
side of it, you have that question. There's a lot of people right now saying, we got problems at home.
Yeah. And we do.
Ethan's saying Harris is going later this week.
Oh, well, she's got to take her time getting down there, right? You got to make sure that everything's
She's got a
set
busy
up.
schedule, guys.
She does. P.S. Is Biden still on the beach? Do we know? Does anybody know?
I think it's just usually safe to assume that he is rather than him being anywhere else.
Well, I mean,
that
I
seems to be
wouldn't-
where I see him all the time.
I wouldn't imagine him ever being in the White House any longer. It seems
No.
like he's just straight up been excommunicated from the administration at this point.
Biden was president. Why would he be at the White House?
I wish I knew.
He did issue something from
The beach.
the beach. No, from...
Was it signed and sealed?
He did, like, when the attacks happened, he was in some room someplace giving a comment to the press.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
I saw that
So-
too.
Gotcha.
Yeah, he's probably in D.C.
Friends that are in the chat, we appreciate you. Please do drop comments. We're going to be reading those all evening. And if you have not yet, please do hit the like button. Share the show here with your friends. We want everybody to come hang out with us instead of hanging out with CBS. I think there's like about 150,000, maybe more people in there. We could probably pull a couple, right?
We want to steal 50 of their viewers.
Well, too bad they've turned off the chat. You can only chat on CBS's feed here if you are approved by the network, whatever that means. Do you guys think we could ever get approved? Should we put it in an application?
I demand them renounce the censorship that they are putting on us
This
right
is
now.
just this aggression will not stand.
No.
Man. Yeah. Well, okay. So who do you guys favor right now? I mean, do you think it's pretty even, or do you think that Vance or Walz is going to come out ahead here?
I think Vance is pretty sharp in these types of dynamics. I don't know what Walz is like under this type of stuff, like with the pressure, with somebody being hostile towards you. I've never really seen him in that situation. I've seen Vance in that situation. So I'll be curious to see where Walz, like how good is he at this?
Yeah.
Right? He's very high energy guy.
That's for sure. Do you think he's going to enter like he's entered every other rally, just like raging? I could see it.
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say. I think their backgrounds. Vance has, he's a lawyer, but he's a tech lawyer. It's not like he's doing jury trials and stuff like that. And Walz is a teacher, right? And
And a coach.
a coach, and
Coaching them kids.
been a politician for much longer.
And a
So-
veteran, don't forget.
Yeah, and a veteron. Not a combat zone veteran.
No, no, he's not.
He got stationed in Italy. It was great.
No, I thought that was Iraq.
I don't
the
know.
same place, Italy and Iraq.
I get them confused. They both start with I.
Yeah, it's so hard to tell.
I have bad grammar, so I can't tell those two apart.
Dyslexia.
Yes. All right, in the chat, who do you guys think is going to come out ahead? I want to know what you guys are thinking. What do you think the most spicy issue for these two guys is going to be tonight?
Stolen valor.
I mean, that seems like a pretty
that's
obvious
gonna be
one.
the one. Yeah, when it's got to happen. So Vance is going to make that hit, and just how well can he articulate it and make it land?
Yeah.
Right. That's gonna be the question. Can we get a moment?
Yeah.
You want cats eating the cats.
You wonder
Are
what
we
the
going to
cats want.
celebrate that way?
Well, I mean,
That was a great clip we had last time.
It isn't even that like yay eating cats or yay they got after the Haitians. It's just that it was congruent with the meme at the moment, and so there was wisdom there. There's like campaign smarts going on there.
Yeah. Well, speaking of campaign smarts, I wonder what the Walz camp is going to have prepared to sort of try to diffuse that stolen valor question, because they've had a lot of time to prepare for this. It came up in their friendly interview that they did, Kamala and Walz together,
Right.
and he stumbled over it there. So I
Yeah.
can't imagine it's going to be any easier for him in this moment.
I don't know. It depends. If they bring up, I think the moderators are unlikely to bring up Second Amendment issues here. So that way it avoids the question. So Vance has got to find a spot to bring it up because Second Amendment's not going to come up. There's no way CBS is going to ask that question.
Well, no, that's true, but
Yeah.
Vance is going to have to bring it in somewhere.
Yeah, the question is, can he do it in a way that doesn't look just disingenuous or stupid or
Well, foreign policy is a pretty clear way to do that, right? That's an avenue.
Yeah, it's just that the story lends itself to a Second Amendment because that was Waltz's statement: is you shouldn't be able to carry weapons of war
Like
in
he
America.
did in Iraq.
Like
he did in Italy.
Also, Evan got me pretty good in the comments.
Evan's-
I think the couch wins.
Couch.
And I actually just pulled up that tweet from Clint that you were mentioning, Meso. Here, I'll actually pull it up here. This is what you were referencing, it looked like. J.D. Vance can lose the election for Trump tonight. If the attacks in the Middle East today turn tonight into a 90-minute saber-rattling contest, I'm out. I'm looking for peace, period. You promise me war, and you'll become no different than the disgusting Democrat option.
Yeah, that's a strong tweet from Clint Russell. Liberty Lockdown.
We'll see.
Pod.
It's a lot of like the big tent people, like a lot of the newcomers into the Trump fold, in a sense. Like they're the ones that are very leery about all this stuff with Iran, but the general base, I think, has a lot of they want the saber rattling. So there's kind of we'll see where he stands there.
He's going to have to walk a tight line because the Republicans need the big tent newcomers in order to win this election, I think. And so if they do go aggressively at it and they turn all of us off, that's a tough road to win back after spending all year courting libertarians and independents, bringing RFK in, coming to the Libertarian National Convention. I mean, it's been a long road to get to this point where they've got this coalition, and I would be surprised if they're not savvy to that and really cognizant of how to approach this.
Yeah, it's
Joe,
just who.
Sorry, you're on mic 1. You're peaking pretty hot.
Okay. Hey, everybody in the chat, how do we sound out there? Let us know. Is it too loud, too quiet? We will get it addressed if it's iffy.
Yeah. So what I see it is the campaign strategy is: can you keep your donor base, which is very reliant on a pro-Israel position, and without losing your America First grassroots? And I think most of the America First grassroots are far more sensitive to Ukraine than they are to Israel. So
Yeah.
at that point, there's an exception built into the Trump doctrine right now, I think, for the right, because dispensationalism, and everything we've discussed about on the podcast previously, there's so many reasons why there's just an exception that we treat it like this 51st state, and that's just the underlying political reality right now. So I don't really see them. Unfortunately, libertarians are not going to get what they want out of this, which is, no, we're not going to support Israel in this. It's going to be, no, we're pretty much committed to defending Israel, period. Yeah. Because there's just no incentive. There's no electoral incentive to do otherwise.
So if you're talking to a libertarian about this election, and they're asking if this is something that should be a deal breaker for them in their vote, obviously that's a personal question, but like where do you lie on that? Is that a deal breaker? The Israel issue?
Vote for Chase Oliver if it's a deal breaker, and you got to vote your conscience.
Sure.
I think voting has many purposes, right? It isn't just to vote for the guy who wins. That's a dumb purpose.
I've never voted for the guy who's won.
Yeah, right. It's not just to vote. You could vote strategically. I think that totally makes sense, right? If you're in a swing state, you got that question, and you're a huge, opponent of Israel's actions in Gaza and Lebanon. Waltz just walked out, and he's
is he raging?
Are they up? Let's get this up.
All
here.
right.
Give us your last thoughts as we watch here as J.D. Vance is off in
they're
the
just
wings.
just walking in.
There he is.
It's performance.
Yeah, here we go.
Okay, this is a weird start.
Finishing my point that there's a substantial question for people who are in swing states. I totally understand, but not everyone thinks of voting that way. A lot of people think of it as terms of what is my will, what am I willing to submit my will to, and what can I actually sleep at night doing.
Yeah.
And if Israel's your top issue, like, you're not going to win under the Trump regime. Like, it's not going to happen. He's going to treat it like it's 51st state. That's just how it is.
Yeah.
But you'll get Ukraine, which is a huge win. Like, if in the scale of the last 30 years of politics, that's a huge win. Just that. So don't underestimate that. I mean, if you're an anti-war person.
Sam wants us all to know that we all sound fine except for you, Joe. You sound like a dork.
That's why I was laughing before.
Well played, brother. Well played.
Also, real quick, is there an audience for this, or are they doing it the same?
Same. It's like the others. Yeah.
That's going to be lame.
What is this? What is this?
I want a
COVID
crowd.
rules?
I want a crowd.
Yeah. I want some booze and some cheers. All right, we're gearing up here, guys. We're getting close.
10 seconds.
Oh, it's so exciting.
Ethan just noted that we should keep up Trump's Truth Social up because he's doing live commentary.
Tonight, with just over a month to go until Election Day, the first and only meeting between the two men.
I never made a Truth Social account.
Vice President of the United States.
What's wrong with me?
Democratic Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota
Everything.
and Republican Senator J.D. Vance.
That's for you, Kaylee.
That's for you, Kaylee.
This is likely the final debate of this election cycle, and voting is already
This is
underway.
crazy.
Down right
The
now.
fact that this is the
CBS
final
News polling
debate.
shows this
It's
remains a
insanity.
race either presidential
Doesn't matter what we think.
candidate
I
win.
know.
Nothing about this
CBS
election has been
News
normal
vice presidential debate
On
starts
purpose.
now.
on purpose.
By design.
And we're going to take this country back. And we are ready to continue to build the future together.
Because we're not going back.
Country red with President Donald J. Trump's leadership.
You know what's at the end of this little journey? Kamala Harris as the next president of the United States.
Terrifying.
This is a CBS News special, live from CBS News headquarters in New York. America decides.
Got the stream deck this time. That's great.
Presidential debate.
Here we go,
Good
kids.
evening, I'm Nora O'Donnell, and thank you for joining us for tonight's CBS News Vice Presidential Debate.
I don't know
We
who
wanna
these people
welcome
are.
our viewers on CBS, on other networks
I
here in
recognize the
US
one on the
and
left,
around the
but
world.
I don't
We
know
have
her
a
name.
consequential night ahead, and our focus is the issues that matter to you, the voter. Let's introduce the candidates. Minnesota's Democratic Governor Tim Walz and Ohio's Republican Senator J.D. Vance tonight meeting for the first time.
It always looks like JD has eyeliner on. There's something about his face that's like that.
I'm Margaret
It's just his
Brennan in
Wait,
bodacious,
did they just
thick
shake hands there?
and
eyelashes.
civil debate.
I think they
Yeah.
do.
These are the rules that both campaigns have agreed to. Questions will be directed at one candidate who will have 2 minutes to respond. The other candidate will be allowed 2 minutes for rebuttal. Then each candidate will get another minute to make
bad
further
TD in
points,
there. I'm doing
with
a
an
better job
additional
right here.
Evan's saying we should
each at the
increase the
discretion
CBS
of the
volume a bit.
moderator.
Oh, fine.
The primary role of the moderators
gonna
is to
turn it down for me,
facilitate
then.
the
Yeah, can you turn it
debate
down in
between
my
the
headphones?
candidates, enforce the rules,
fine for me.
and provide the candidates with the opportunity to fact-check claims made by
Yeah,
each
I can put
other.
captions on, Pat.
CBS News reserves the right to mute
Oh,
the
they
candidates'
don't have 'em
microphones
available.
to maintain decorum.
CBS
We have
hates
not shared the questions or
handy-capable
topics
people.
with the campaigns.
And America.
The stage is set.
And America.
Governor, Senator, thank you for joining us. Let's get started. Tonight, our country is facing several unfolding
How's the
crises.
CBS volume,
the Middle
guys,
East is on the brink
after,
of war.
Joe changed it?
Americans are suffering from the catastrophic impact of Hurricane Helene. And now a labor strike as 25,000 dock workers from Maine to Texas
another
are
interesting
picketing.
issue.
We're going to begin tonight with the Middle East. Margaret.
Thank you, Nora.
Wow. Right into it.
Earlier today, Iran launched its largest attack yet on Israel, but that attack failed, thanks to joint U.S. and Israeli
Sorta.
defensive
Sorta.
action. President Biden has deployed more than 40,000 U.S. military personnel and assets to that region over the past year to try to prevent a regional war.
Very selective
Iran
editing
is weak.
on that summary.
Cheryl saying
But
could
the
go up a
U.S.
little
still
bit more.
considers
got
it
it.
the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world, and it has drastically reduced the time it would take to develop a nuclear weapon. It is down now to 1 or 2 weeks' time. Governor Walz, if you were the final voice in the Situation Room, would you support
Why haven't
or
they developed
oppose
one?
a preemptive strike
Also,
by
I thought
Israel
Biden didn't have
on Iran?
troops in a
You
war
have 2
zone.
minutes.
Well, thank you, and thank you for those joining at home tonight. Let's keep in mind where this started. October 7th, Hamas terrorists massacred
Deer in
over
headlights look?
1,400 Israelis
Just a
and
little.
took prisoners.
He's like, don't forget to
Iran, Israel's ability to be able to defend itself is absolutely fundamental. Getting its hostages back, fundamental, and ending the humanitarian crisis in
Emily,
Gaza.
we're here for business
But
only.
the expansion of Israel and its proxies is an absolute fundamental necessity for the United States to have the steady leadership there. You saw it experienced
blink,
today,
dude.
where along with our Israeli partners
do
and our
it, blink.
coalition,
Oh, there
able
it
to
is.
stop the incoming attack. But what's fundamental here is that steady leadership is going to matter. It's clear, and the world saw it on that debate stage a few weeks ago, a nearly 80-year-old Donald Trump talking about crowd sizes
Oh,
is not
fuck
what
off.
we need in this moment. But it's not
Got
just
Bennett
that.
triggered already.
It's
I'm
those
sorry,
that
they
were
can't pull
closest
the
to
age
Donald
card
Trump
now.
will understand how dangerous he is when the world is this dangerous. His chief of staff, John Kelly, said that he was the most flawed human being he'd ever met. And both of his secretaries of defense and his national security advisors said he should be nowhere near the White House. Now, the person closest to them, Donald Trump, said he's unfit for the highest office. That was Senator Vance. What we've seen out of Vice President Harris is we've seen steady leadership. We've seen a calmness that is able to draw on the coalitions to bring them together. Understanding that our allies matter. When our allies see Donald Trump turn towards Vladimir Putin, turn towards North Korea, when we start to see that type of fickleness around holding the coalitions together, we will stay committed. And as the Vice President said today we will protect our forces and our allied forces, and there will be consequences.
Governor, your time is up. Senator Vance, the same question. Would you support or oppose a preemptive strike by Israel on Iran? You have 2 minutes.
How would it be
So, Margaret, I
preemptive?
want to answer the question. First of all, thanks, Governor. Thanks to CBS for hosting the debate. And thanks, most importantly, to the American people who are watching this evening and caring enough about this country to pay attention to this vice presidential debate. I want to answer the question, but I want to actually give an introduction to myself a little bit because I recognize a lot of Americans don't know who either one of us are. I was raised in a working-class family.
Oh,
My
no,
mother
he pulled the
required food
Kamala card.
assistance for periods of her life. My grandmother required Social Security help to raise me.
Wrote the hit
and she
book,
raised me in part because my
Hillbillyology.
own mother struggled with addiction for a big chunk of my early life. I went to college on the GI Bill after I enlisted in the Marine Corps and served in Iraq. And so I stand here asking to be your vice president with extraordinary gratitude for this country, for the American dream that made it possible for me to live my dreams. And most importantly, I know that a lot of you are worried about the chaos in the world and the feeling that the American dream is unattainable. I want to try to convince you tonight over the next 90 minutes that if we get better leadership in the White House, if we get Donald Trump back in the White House, the American dream is going to be attainable once again. Now, to answer this particular question, we have to remember that as much as Governor Walz just accused Donald Trump of being an agent of chaos, Donald Trump actually delivered stability in the world, and he did it by establishing effective deterrence. People were afraid of stepping out of line. Iran, which launched this attack, has received over $100 billion in unfrozen assets thanks to the Kamala Harris administration. What do they use that money for? They use it to buy weapons that they're now launching against our allies, and God forbid, potentially launching against the United States as well. Donald Trump recognized that for people to fear the United States, you needed peace through strength. They needed to recognize that if they got out of line, the United States global leadership would put stability and peace back in the world. Now, you asked about a preemptive strike, Margaret, and I want to answer the question. Look, it is up to Israel what they think they need to do to keep their country safe, and we should support our allies wherever they are when they're fighting the bad guys. I think that's the right approach to take with the Israel question.
Thank you, Senator. Governor Walz, do you care to respond to any of the allegations?
Really smooth.
Well, look,
really
Donald
smooth.
Trump was in office. We'll sometimes hear a revisionist history, but when Donald Trump was in office, it was Donald Trump who we had a coalition of nations that had boxed Iran's nuclear program in, the inability to advance it. Donald Trump pulled that program and put nothing else in its place.
Walz is right about
Iran
that.
is closer to a nuclear weapon than they were before because of Donald Trump's fickle leadership. And when Iran shot down an American aircraft in international airspace,
except for that point,
Donald Trump tweeted, because that's the standard diplomacy of Donald Trump. And when Iranian missiles
Twitter diplomacy? Kind of like that.
near U.S. troops, and they received traumatic brain
Trust me,
injuries,
I won't do this in
Donald
Greenland.
Trump wrote it off as headaches. Look, our allies understand that Donald Trump is fickle. He will go to whoever has the most flattery or where it makes sense to him. Steady leadership like you witnessed today, like you witnessed in April. Both Iranian attacks were repelled. Our coalition is strong.
This attack
and
was
we
not
need the steady
repelled.
leadership that Kamala
That
Harris
is not
is
true.
providing.
Senator
that
Vance, the U.S. did have a
Well, I
diplomatic
didn't say it was
deal
unsuccessful.
with
You can
Iran
find
to temporarily
videos
pause
of
parts
them
its
striking the
nuclear
ground.
program, and
Like,
President
this is
Trump
ridiculous.
I
exit
think someone in the
that
comments
deal.
said you can see a shell
He
killing
recently
someone.
said,
Yeah, there's a
just
Palestinian
5
guy
days
who has
ago,
the
U.S.
shell
must
fall on
now
him.
make a diplomatic deal with Iran because the consequences are impossible. Did he make a mistake? You have 1 minute.
Well, first of all, Margaret, diplomacy is not a dirty word, but I think that's something that Governor Walz just said is quite extraordinary. You yourself just said Iran is as close to a nuclear weapon today as they have ever been. And Governor Walz, you blame Donald Trump. Who has been the vice president for the last 3.5 years? And the answer is your running mate, not mine. Donald Trump consistently made the world more secure. Now, we talk about what the sequence of events that led us to where we are right now, and you can't ignore October the 7th, which I appreciate Governor Walz bringing up. But when did Iran and Hamas and their proxies attack Israel? It was during the administration of Kamala Harris. So Governor Walz can criticize Donald Trump's tweets, but effective, smart diplomacy and peace through strength is how you bring stability back to a very broken world. Donald Trump has already done it once before. Ask yourself at home, when was the last time, I'm 40 years old, when was the last time that an American president didn't have a major conflict break out? The only answer is during the 4 years that Donald Trump was president.
Gentlemen, we have a lot to get to. Nora?
Margaret, thank you. Let's turn now to Hurricane Helene. The storm could become one of the deadliest on record. More than 160 people are dead and hundreds more are missing.
Yo, Adam.
Scientists say climate change makes these hurricanes larger,
of course,
stronger, and more deadly because of the historic rainfall. Senator Vance, according to CBS News polling,
I thought climate change was going to make everything dry.
Americans and more than 60% of
makes
Republicans under the age of 45
makes everything
favor
more
the U.S.
extreme.
taking steps to try and reduce climate change.
It's a
Senator,
unique change that
what
mutates.
responsibility would the Trump administration
Different type
have
of
to
storm.
try and reduce the
a unique
impact
change
of
that
climate
mutates.
change? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Sure. So first of all, let's start with the hurricane because it's an unbelievable, unspeakable human tragedy. I just saw today actually a photograph of 2 grandparents on a roof with a 6-year-old child, and it was the last photograph ever taken of them because the roof collapsed and those innocent people lost their lives. And I'm sure Governor Walz joins me in saying our hearts go out to those innocent people, our prayers go out to them, and we want as robust and aggressive as a federal response as we can get to save as many lives as possible, and then, of course, afterwards, to help the people in those communities rebuild. I mean, these are communities that I love. Some of them I know very personally in Appalachia, all across the Southeast. They need their government to do their job, and I commit that when Donald Trump is president again, the government will put the citizens of this country first when they suffer from a disaster. Now, Nora, you asked about climate change. I think this is a very important issue. Look, a lot of people are justifiably worried about all these crazy weather patterns. I think it's important for us, first of all, to say, Donald Trump and I support clean air, clean water. We want the environment to be cleaner and safer. But one of the things that I've noticed some of our Democratic friends talking a lot about is a concern about carbon emissions, this idea that carbon emissions drives all of the climate change. Well, let's just say that's true, just for the sake of argument, so we're not arguing about weird science. Let's just say that's true. Well, if you believe that, what would you want to do? The answer is that you'd want to reshore as much American manufacturing as possible, and you'd want to produce as much energy as possible in the United States of America because we're the cleanest economy in the entire world. What have Kamala Harris's policies actually led to? More energy production in China, more manufacturing overseas, more doing business in some of the dirtiest parts of the entire world. And when I say that, I mean the amount of carbon emissions they're doing per unit of economic output. So if we actually care about getting cleaner air and cleaner water, the best thing to do is to double down and invest in American workers and the American people. And unfortunately, Kamala Harris has done exactly the opposite.
Remember when Trump proposed nuking the storm?
That was awesome.
Well, we got close to an agreement because all those things are happening. Look, first of all, it is a horrific tragedy.
That was not the right transition.
And my heart goes out to the folks
Did
that
he
are
just
down
say Kamala
there,
was offshoring
in
energy
contact
production?
with
Yeah,
governors.
he
I
just said
serve
that.
as co-chair of the Council of Governors as we work together on these emergency
Obviously not what he
managements.
meant, but-
Governors know no partisanship. They work together. So all of the governors and the emergency responders are on the ground. Those happen on the front end. The federal government comes in, makes sure they're there to that we recover. But we're still in that phase where we need to make sure that they're staying there, staying focused. Now, look, coming back to the climate change issue, there's no doubt this thing roared onto the scene faster and stronger than anything we've seen. Senator Vance has said that there's a climate problem in the past. Donald Trump called it a hoax and then joked that these things would make more beachfront property to be able to invest in. What we've seen out of the Harris administration now, the Biden-Harris administration, is we've seen this investment.
Oh, he's
we've
even
seen
calling it the
massive
Harris
investments,
administration
the biggest
now.
in global history that we've seen in the Inflation Reduction Act has created jobs all across the country. 2,000 in Jeffersonville, Ohio, taking the EV technology that we invented and making it here. 200,000 jobs across the country. The largest solar manufacturing plant in North America sits in Minnesota. But my farmers know climate change is real. They've seen 500-year droughts, 500-year floods back to back. But what they're doing is adapting.
Your farmer's been around for 1,000 years?
Tell me, look, I harvest corn, I harvest soybean, and I harvest wind. We are
What does that
producing
even
more
mean?
natural gas and more oil at any time than we ever have. We're also producing more clean energy. So the solution for us
it's the
is
lizard
to
people,
continue
Dave.
to move forward, that climate change
They've
is
been
real.
around a while.
Reducing our impact is absolutely critical, but this is not a false choice. You can do that at the same time you're creating the jobs that we're seeing all across the country. That's exactly what this administration has done. We are seeing
By
us
subsidizing
becoming
clean
an
energy?
superpower for the future.
Yeah.
Creating more
not
jobs
just the
by
current.
spending
And that's what
our money?
absolutely
That's the
makes
Inflation
sense.
Reduction Act.
And then we start thinking
Thanks, guys.
about how do we mitigate these disasters.
Thank you. Senator, I want to give you an opportunity to respond there. The governor mentioned that President Trump has called climate change a hoax. Do you agree?
Well, look, what the president has said is that if the Democrats, in particular Kamala Harris and her leadership, if they really believe that climate change is serious, what they would be doing is more manufacturing and more energy production in the United States of America, and that's not what they're doing. So clearly, Kamala Harris herself doesn't believe her own rhetoric on this. If she did, she would actually agree with Donald Trump's energy policies. Now, something Governor Walz said I think is important to touch upon, because when we talk about clean energy, I think that's a slogan that often the Democrats will use here. And I'm talking, of course, about the Democratic leadership. And the real issue is that if you're spending hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars of American taxpayer money on solar panels that are made in China, number one, you're going to make the economy dirtier. We should be making more of those solar panels here in the United States of America. Some of them are, Tim, but a lot of them are being made overseas in China, especially the components that go into those solar panels. So if you really want to make the environment cleaner, you've got to invest in more energy production. We haven't built a nuclear facility, I think, in the past 40 years.
Nukes.
Natural gas, we got to invest more in it. Kamala Harris has done the opposite. That's raised energy prices and also
We got
meant
Satoshi
that we're doing
Nakamoto
more
in the chat.
What?
Satoshi?
Would you like to
Dude.
respond?
Thank you for
Well,
inventing
look,
Bitcoin.
Can you send me some of those Bitcoin that you have? I heard you have a million.
On that. We're producing more
can
oil,
afford
but
two-
folks know.
two
And
Bitcoin.
like I said again, these are not liberal folks. These are not folks that are Green New Deal folks. These are farmers that have been drought one year, massive flooding the next year. They understand
That's
that it makes
weather,
sense. Look,
not
our number
climate.
one export
Every single
cannot be
goddamn
topsoil
summer,
from
they
erosion
make the
from
same
these massive
thing,
storms.
and in the
We saw it
wintertime,
in
you
Minnesota
say,
this
what's
summer.
really cold? They're like, well,
And
that's
we're
right, they're
figuring
not
out
climate.
how do we
Jesus!
respond to that. We're thinking ahead on
Yeah!
this.
I want David in this crowd right now.
We're starting to weatherproof some of these things. The
It'd be so
infrastructure
funny if
law
it
that
was just
passed
him.
He just
allows
used
us
the
to
term
think about
weather.
mitigation in the future. How
It's
do we make sure
weather.
we're protecting by burying our power lines? How do we make sure that we're protecting lakefronts and things that we're seeing more and more of? But to call it a hoax.
This is more
and
of
to
a
take
debate.
The oil company
Yeah.
executives to Mar-a-Lago
Very much.
say, give me money for my campaign and I'll let you do whatever you want. We can be smarter about that. And an all
You gave
above
away
energy policy is exactly what
billions
she's
of
doing,
dollars
creating those jobs
to energy
right here.
companies you like
Governor,
in the
your time is
Inflation
up.
Reduction
The overwhelming
Act. To be clear,
consensus among
like that's what
scientists
happened.
is that the Earth's climate is warming at an unprecedented
They're,
rate. Margaret,
they're
Thank you,
opinioning
Nora.
again.
Yeah.
We're going to turn now to
That's what we're calling
immigration.
now.
The crisis at the U.S.
That's what journals do, they
Mexico border
opinionate.
The majority of
consistently
scientists
ranks as
agree
one of the
the climate
top
is
issue
warming.
for
Despite the
American
fact that we just saw that research that said it's been
Senator
cooling
Vance,
for the last like 30,000
your
years.
campaign is
Well, yeah,
pledging to
well,
carry out the largest
but it's warming
mass
more than the
deportation
period
plan
that we
in
care
American
about.
history, and to
Right.
use the U.S. military to do so. Could you be more specific about exactly how this will work? For example, would you
welcome,
deport
Matt.
parents who have entered the U.S. illegally and
Haven't seen
separate
that name in
them
forever.
from any
What's up,
of their
man?
children who were born on U.S. soil? You have 2 minutes.
So first of all, Margaret, before we talk about deportations, we have to stop the bleeding. We have a historic immigration crisis because Kamala Harris started and said that she wanted to undo all of Donald Trump's border policies. 94 executive orders suspending deportations, decriminalizing illegal aliens, massively increasing the asylum fraud that exists in our system. That has opened the floodgates. And what it's meant is that a lot of fentanyl is coming into our country. I had a mother who struggled with opioid addiction and has gotten clean. I don't want people who are struggling with addiction to be deprived of their second chance because Kamala Harris let in fentanyl into our communities at record levels. So you've got to stop the bleeding. You've got to re-implement Donald Trump's border policies,
Are we getting botted?
build the
Our
wall,
views are going like up
re-implement
and down very
deportations,
strangely.
And that gets me to your point, Margaret, about what do we actually do?
let it happen.
So we've got 20,
It keeps jumping between 30 and 40,
who are
back
here
and
in the
forth.
country.
I've got
What do we
16
do with
tabs
them? I
open.
think the first thing that we do is we start with the criminal migrants. About 1 million of those people have committed some form of crime in addition to crossing the border illegally. I think you start with deportations on those folks. And then I think you make it harder for illegal aliens to undercut the wages of American workers. A lot of people will go home if they can't work for less than minimum wage in our own country. And by the way, that'll be really good for our workers who
Appreciate
just
the
want to earn
play-by-play,
a fair
Evan.
wage for doing a good day's work. And the final point, Margaret, is you ask about family separation. Right now in this country, Margaret, we have 320,000 children that the Department of Homeland Security has effectively lost. Some of them have been sex trafficked. Some of them hopefully are at homes with their families. Some of them have been used as drug trafficking mules. The real family separation policy in this
put
country
the stream on every
is
TV you have,
unfortunately
guys.
Kamala Harris's wide open
smash the
southern
like button.
border. And I'd ask
Hit the
my
like
fellow
button.
Americans to remember when she came into office,
a good pivot.
she said she was going to do this. Real leadership would be saying, you know what, I screwed up. We're going to go back to Donald Trump's border policies. I wish that she would do that. It would be good for all of us.
Governor, do you care to respond to any of those specific allegations, including that the vice president is, quote, letting in fentanyl and using kids as drug
Is this
mules,
T-ball?
among other things?
This is T-ball.
regarding children.
The drug mule is not true, but I will say about this, about the fentanyl, because this is a crisis of this, the opioid crisis. And the good news on this is the last 12 months saw the largest decrease in opioid deaths in our nation's history. 30% decrease in Ohio, but there's still more work to do. But let's go back to this on immigration. Kamala Harris was the Attorney General of the largest state and a border state in California. She's the only person in this race who prosecuted
doesn't like us.
transnational gangs for human trafficking and
It's in there
drug
somewhere,
interventions.
Satoshi. Keep looking.
But look, we all want to solve this. Most of us want to solve this. And that is the United States Congress. That's the Border Patrol agents. That's the Chamber of Commerce. That's most Americans out here. That's why we had the fairest and the toughest bill on immigration that this nation's seen. It was crafted by a conservative senator from Oklahoma, James Lankford. I know him. He's super conservative, but he's a man of principle, wants to get it done. Democrats and Republicans worked on this piece of legislation. The Border Patrol said, this is what we need in here. These are the experts.
Border
and
Patrol
the Chamber of
Union.
Commerce and the Wall Street Journal
Right.
said, pass this thing. Kamala Harris helped get there. 1,500 new border agents. Detection for drugs. DOJ money to speed
15,000?
up these
can't
the
remember.
adjudications on this, just what America wants. But as soon as I was getting ready to pass and actually tackle this, Donald Trump said no, told them to vote against
Why?
it because it gives him a campaign issue. It gives him to, what would Donald Trump talk about if we actually did some of these things? And they need to be done by the legislature. You can't just do this through the executive branch. So look, we have the options to do this. Donald Trump had 4 years. He had 4 years to do this. And he promised you, America, how easy it would be. I'll build you a big, beautiful wall, and Mexico will pay for it. Less than 2% of that wall got built, and Mexico didn't pay a dime. But here we are again, 9 years after he came down that escalator,
Isn't Kamala
dehumanizing
adding to the wall?
people and
Isn't
telling
that
them
part
what he
of her
was going to
plan?
do. As far as the deportation plan,
like she
at
did
one
say
point,
that.
Senator Vance
can't
said
remember,
it was
though.
so unworkable to be laughable. So that's where we're at. Pass the bill, she'll sign it.
Governor, your time is up.
I agree, Adam.
Senator,
We've been doing the same
question
thing
was,
for
will
so
you
long.
separate parents from their children?
Did you know that Donald Trump
even
controls
if their
Congress?
Kids are
That's
U.S.
crazy.
citizens. You have 1 minute.
From
Margaret, my
Mar-a-Lago.
point is that we already have massive child separations
think we
thanks
should
to
do a
Kamala
UFC
Harris's
fight
open border. And I didn't
instead.
accuse Kamala
Can you do?
Harris of inviting drug
Just
mules.
decide
I said
president.
that she enabled the
UFC
Mexican
fight.
drug cartels
I would do live
to
commentary
operate
to a UFC
freely in
fight.
this country. And we
should
know
bring
that
back
they use
duels.
children as drug
Yes.
mules, and it is a disgrace, and it has to stop. Look, I think what Tim said just doesn't pass the smell test. For 3 years, Kamala Harris went out bragging that she was going to undo Donald Trump's border policy. She did exactly that. We had a record number of illegal crossings. We had a record number of fentanyl coming into our country. And now that she's running for president, or a few months before, she says that somehow she got religion and cared a lot about a piece of legislation. The only thing that she did when she became the vice president, when she became
Nice.
the appointed
That's
border
good.
czar, was to undo 94 Donald
I got some good
Trump
puns in
executive
here.
actions
I got a lot of
that
Walz
opened
puns.
the border.
That was-
This
that was
problem
good.
is leading to massive problems in the United States of America. Parents who can't afford health care, schools that are overwhelmed. It's got to stop, and it will when Donald Trump is president again.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, what about our CBS News polling?
I'll give you my
which
seed
does
phrase,
show that a
Satoshi, if you want to give me that
majority
Bitcoin.
Of Americans, more than 50%, support mass deportations.
Look, we fix this issue with a bill that is necessary. But the issue on this is what happens when you don't want to solve it. You demonize it. And we saw this. And Senator Vance, and it surprises me on this, talking about and saying, I will create stories to bring attention to this. That vilified a large number of people who were here legally in the community of Springfield. The Republican governor said, it's not true. Don't do it. There's consequences. There's consequences. We could come together. Senator Langford did it. We could come together and solve this.
They're eating
if
the
we
dogs.
didn't let
They're eating
Donald
the
Trump
cats.
continue to make it an issue. And the consequences in Springfield were the governor had to send state law enforcement to escort kindergartners to school. I believe Senator Vance wants to solve this, but by standing with Donald Trump and not working together to find a solution, it becomes a talking point. And when it becomes a talking point like this, we dehumanize and villainize other human beings.
Do we want to pause it real quick? I got something
Governor,
real quick.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, I'll give you 1 minute, but let me just ask you the
We're just
question
going to miss a little
first.
bit, but I just want to note that it's obvious that Walz was coached not to attack Vance, but to attack Trump for several strategic reasons, at least one of them being that Vance is young and attractive and unknown, while Trump is known and widely despised by the base of the Democrats, so that stirs the base, and then it categorizes the most important person.
Do you disagree that Congress controls the purse strings and would need to support many of the changes that you would actually want to implement? You have 1 minute.
Look, Margaret, first of all, the gross majority of what we need to do at the southern border is just empowering law enforcement to do their job. I've been to the southern border more than our borders are. Kamala Harris has been. And it's actually heartbreaking because the Border Patrol agents, they just want to be empowered to do their job. Of course, additional resources would help, but most of this is about the president and the vice president empowering our law enforcement to say, if you try to come across the border illegally, you've got to stay in Mexico, you've got to go back through proper channels. Now, Governor Walz brought up the community of Springfield, and he's very worried about the things that I've said in Springfield. Look, in Springfield, Ohio, and in communities all across this country, you've got schools that are overwhelmed. You've got hospitals that are overwhelmed.
Yeah, he's going to
You've
zoom
got
out to the larger
housing
issue,
that is totally
which is wiser.
unaffordable because we brought in millions of illegal immigrants to compete with Americans for scarce homes. The people that I'm most worried about in Springfield, Ohio, are the American citizens who have had their lives destroyed by Kamala Harris's open border. It is a disgrace, Tim. And I actually think, I agree with you. I think you want to solve this problem, but I don't think that Kamala Harris does.
Senator,
really
your
nice
time
to
is
each
up.
other.
Governor, you have 1 minute.
Man, this is such a normal debate.
Yeah,
I don't like it.
That asked for the bill.
So the reason why he is not defending the Donald Trump's opposition to the immigration bill is because that's defense. The reason why he's not bringing up the cats and instead he's shifting to the larger immigration issue is because that's defense. Debate should be fought almost exclusively offensively because you want to advance your messaging and pretend like their messaging doesn't matter. Because when people see it, he's not addressing that person's accusation. It must not matter, right? It must not be important or it's bad faith or whatever. So people kind of read into it what they're expecting. Does it make sense?
Absolutely. Adhere to what we know, American principles. I don't talk about my faith a lot, but Matthew 25:40 talks about, to the least amongst us you do unto me. I think that's true of most Americans. They simply want order to it. This bill does it. It's funded. It's supported by the people who do it. And it lets us keep our dignity about how we treat
Vance
other people.
should attack the things that are
Thank you,
attached
Governor.
to
And
that
just
bill
to clarify
that made it
for our
unworkable,
viewers,
including
Springfield,
tons of
Ohio
foreign
does
aid
have a large
and
number of
legalizing
Haitian
amnesty for all the current
migrants
illegals
who have legal
in the country,
status.
right?
Yeah, but
Temporary
once again, it's
protected
defense.
status.
It's the meta strategy.
Senator, we have so much to get to.
Margaret, I think it's important
We're
because
going to turn now to the
debate-
economy. Thank
Margaret,
you.
the rules were that
The
you guys
economy,
weren't going to
we're-
fact check. And since you're fact checking me, I think it's important to say what's actually going on. So there's an application
Good
called
job,
the
Power
Citizen
move,
Key
power
One
move.
app, where you can go on as an illegal migrant, apply for asylum or apply for parole, and be
It does
granted
feel
legal
a
status
little
at the wave
I don't know, maybe
of
you guys
a
can
Kamala
correct it,
Harris
but
open border wand.
Walz
That
saying
is not a
the
person coming
Haitian
in applying
migrants
for a
were all
green card
legal?
and waiting for 10
That
years.
feels a little.
Thank you, Senator.
That's a lot of migrants.
Well,
immigration,
they're there
Margaret.
from under
Thank you,
asylum
Senator,
laws
for this
legally,
Okay.
right? They're not stealthily sneaking
so
over
much
the
to
border.
get to, Senator.
Those
We have
laws
so
have been
much.
on the books since 1990.
Thank you, gentlemen.
The
we
CBP
want to have
app has not been on the book.
They muted him.
Oh, they took off.
Gentlemen,
See, classic.
the audience can't hear you because your mics are cut. We have so much we want to get to. Thank you for
Then quit
explaining the legal
fact-checking 'em.
process. Nora.
Thank you, Margaret. The economy is
Thank
a
you,
top
Margaret.
concern for voters. Each of your campaigns
chippy.
has released an economic
Make
plan. So
Kyle
let's
dance,
talk
not
about the
me.
specifics.
Jesus.
Governor Walz, Vice President Harris unveiled a plan that includes billions in tax credits for manufacturing, housing, and a renewed child tax credit. The Wharton School says your proposals will increase the nation's deficit by $1.2 trillion. How would you pay for that without ballooning the deficit? Governor, I'll give you 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank
he
you.
is settling a little bit. He seemed more
Kamala
nervous
Harris
in
and
the
I
beginning.
do believe in the middle class because that's where we come from.
Just like nobody told me
grew
that.
up in that. We understand. So those of you out there listening tonight, you're hearing a lot of stuff back and
Is
forth,
she
and
black?
it's good. It's healthy. That's what this is supposed to happen. You should be listening. How's this going to impact me? The bold forward plan that Kamala Harris put out there is talking about this housing issue. The one thing is there's 3 million new houses proposed under this plan with down payment assistance on the front end.
We'll take you up on that,
A
Evan.
house is much
Which
more
just
than
makes
just an
the
asset to be
houses'
traded
prices
somewhere.
go up.
It's foundational to where you're
Bennett,
at. And then
armchair
making sure
economist
that the
over
things
here.
you buy every day,
Nailing it.
whether they be
It's
prescription
very
drugs
basic
or other
economy.
things, that there's fairness in that.
Something we don't have
Look,
a lot of in this
$35
country
insulin is
anymore.
a good
Fair,
thing.
yeah.
But it costs $5
And
to
by
make insulin.
basic economy,
They were
I mean
charging
basic
$800
economics.
before this law went into effect.
I have the
As
best
far as the
words.
housing goes, I've seen it in Minnesota. 12% more houses in Minneapolis. Prices went down on rent 4%. It's working. And then making sure tax cuts go to the middle class. $6,000 child tax credit. We have one in Minnesota. Reduces childhood poverty by a third. We save money in the long run, and we do the right thing for families. And then getting businesses off the ground. The law as it stands right now is $5,000 tax credit for small business, increasing that to $50,000. Now, this is a philosophical difference between us. Donald Trump made a promise, and I'll give you this. He kept it. He took folks to Mar-a-Lago, said, you're rich as hell, I'm going to give you a tax cut. He gave the tax cuts that predominantly went to the top class.
That is
what happened
false.
there was
Well, it
an $8
predominantly is the
trillion
key word there.
increase in the national debt, the largest ever. Now he's
Every small business
proposing
I know
a
got a tax cut.
20% consumption or sales tax on everything we bring in. Everyone agrees, including businesses, it would be destabilizing it, it would increase inflation and potentially lead to a recession. Look, this is simple for you. Where are we going? Kamala Harris has said to do the things she wants to do. We'll just ask the wealthiest to pay their fair share. When you do that, our system works best, more people are participating in it, and folks have the things that they need.
Senator, I want to give you a moment to respond on that. But similarly, the Wharton School has done an analysis of the Trump plan.
I want you to
and
respond,
says
but
it would increase the nation's
Not yet.
deficit by $5.8 trillion. My question is the same for you. How do you pay for all that without ballooning the deficit? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, you're going to hear a lot from Tim Walz this evening, and you just heard it in the answer. A lot of what Kamala Harris proposes to do, and some of it, I'll be honest with you, it even sounds pretty good. Here's what you won't hear, is that Kamala Harris has already done it. Because she's been the vice president for 3.5 years. She had the opportunity to enact all of these great policies. And what she's actually done instead is drive the cost of food higher by 25%, drive the cost of housing higher by about 60%. Open the American southern border and make middle-class life unaffordable for a large number of Americans. If Kamala Harris has such great plans for how to address middle-class problems, then she ought to do them now. Not when asking for a promotion, but in the job the American people gave her 3.5 years ago. And the fact that she isn't tells you a lot about how much you can trust her actual plans. Now, Donald Trump's economic plan is not just a plan, but it's also a record. A lot of those same economists attack Donald Trump's plans, and they have PhDs, but they don't have common sense and they don't have wisdom.
They're not Bennett.
Because Donald Trump's economic policies
Fuck
delivered
yeah, boy.
the highest take-home pay in a generation in this country, 1.5% inflation, and to boot, peace and security all over the world. So when people say that Donald Trump's economic plan doesn't
Reckless.
make sense,
Thank you.
I say look at the record. He
We will
delivered
prevent
rising
any dancing from
take-home pay for
occurring
American
on this
workers.
live stream.
Now, Tim,
We cannot
admirably
guarantee
admits
Tim Walz won't
that they
dance off
want
the
to
stage,
undo
though.
the Trump tax
gonna
cuts. But if you
twerk
look
off.
at what was so different about Donald Trump's tax cuts, even from previous Republican tax cut plans, is that a lot of those resources went to giving more take-home pay to middle-class and working-class Americans. It was passed in 2017, and you saw an American economic boom unlike we've seen in a generation in this country. That is a record that I'm proud to run on, and we're going to get back to that common sense wisdom so that you can afford to live the American dream again. I know a lot of you are struggling. I know a lot of you are worried about paying the bills. It's going to stop when Donald Trump brings back common sense to this country.
Governor, do you want to respond to that? What has Kamala Harris done for the middle
Yeah,
class?
well, Kamala Harris's day one was Donald Trump's failure on COVID that led to the collapse of our economy. We were already before COVID in a manufacturing recession, but 10 million people out of work, largest percentage since the Great Depression. 9 million jobs closed on that.
Manufacturing
That was day
recession
one.
before COVID?
Whether it was the
How do you define
Infrastructure
that?
Act or other things we
feel like
moved.
that was
Now,
a
you
during COVID
made a
thing, wasn't
question
it?
about experts
Patrick, during
said
the
this.
debate, I'll
I've made
try
a
to
note
hit
of
that.
this. Economists can't be trusted.
Kyle, I
Science
feel like he was
can't be
saying,
trusted.
like,
National
before
security folks can't
Biden
be trusted.
came in.
Look,
He said
if you're
before
going to be
COVID,
president, you don't have all the answers. Donald Trump believes he does. My pro tip of the day is this. If you need heart surgery, listen to the people at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, not Donald Trump. And the
Listen
same
to
thing
the
goes with
blob
this. And
that
I
got
ask
you into a
out there,
20-year-long
teachers,
war on
nurses,
foreign policy.
truck
Yes.
drivers,
Yeah,
whatever.
thanks.
How is it fair that you're paying your
His eyes are
taxes
very
every year,
intense.
and Donald Trump hasn't paid any federal tax in the last 15 years? And the last year as president. That's what's wrong with the system. There's a way around it, and he's bragged about that. We're just asking for fairness in it, and that's all you want.
You have a minute.
Governor, you say trust the experts. But those same experts for 40 years said that if we shipped our manufacturing base off to China, we'd get cheaper goods. They lied about that. They said if we shipped our industrial base off to other countries, to Mexico and elsewhere, it would make the middle class stronger. They were wrong about that. They were wrong about the idea that if we made America less self-reliant, less productive in our own nation, that it would somehow make us better off, and they were wrong about it. And for the first time in a generation, Donald Trump had the wisdom and the courage to say to that bipartisan consensus, we're not doing it anymore. We're bringing American manufacturing back. We're unleashing American energy. We're going to make
can't argue
more
with
of our
that
own stuff.
logic,
And this isn't just
Satoshi.
an economic issue. And I've got three beautiful little kids at home, 7, 4, and 2, and I love them very much, and I hope they're in bed
wish he
right
would've
now.
hit COVID
But look,
experts on
so
that.
many of the
Would've been wiser.
drugs, the pharmaceuticals that we put in the bodies of our children are manufactured by nations that hate us. This has to stop. And we're not going to stop it by listening to experts. We're going to stop it by listening to common sense wisdom, which is what Donald Trump governed on.
Senator, your time is up. Governor Walz, can you address that? I mean, voters say they trust Donald Trump on the economy more. Why?
Well, if you're listening tonight and you want billionaires to get tax cuts, you heard what the numbers were. Look, I'm a union guy on this. I'm not a guy who wanted to ship things overseas, but I understand that, look, we produce soybeans and corn. We need to have fair trading partners. That's something that we believe in. I think the thing that most concerns me on this is Donald Trump was the guy who created the largest trade deficit in American history with China. So the rhetoric is good. Much of what the senator said right there, I'm in agreement with him on this. I watched it happen too. I watched it to my communities, and we talked about that. But we had people undercutting the right to collectively bargain. We had right to work states made it more difficult. We had companies that were willing to ship it over, and we saw people profit. Folks that are venture capital in some cases, putting money into companies that were overseas. We're in agreement that we bring those home.
I really
the issue
like
is Donald Trump is
Vance's
talking
just
about
like
it. Kamala Harris has a
office-style
record
glance to camera.
250,000 more manufacturing jobs than just out of the IRA.
Yeah, like right there. That was like
Yeah, he just like
appreciate
glances
that.
at the
So,
camera.
if you notice,
It was kind of
what
a
Governor
Kamala
Walz just
move,
did is
what
he
she
said,
did.
first of all, Donald Trump has to listen to the experts. And then when he acknowledged that the experts screwed up, he said, well, Donald Trump didn't do nearly as good of a job as the statistics
No, that's a
show
gross
that he
generalization.
did.
That is
So
not a
what
gross
Tim Walz is
generalization.
doing,
That's
and I honestly,
summarizing.
Tim, I think you got a tough job here because you've got to play whack-a-mole. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver rising take-home pay, which of course he did. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver lower inflation, which of course he did, and then you simultaneously
Till he
got to
spent
defend
a bunch of
Kamala
money
Harris's
during COVID.
atrocious economic record, which has made
That
gas,
pesky COVID.
groceries, and housing unaffordable for American citizens. I was raised by a woman who would sometimes go into medical debt so that she could put food on the table in our household. I know what it's like to not be able to afford the things that you need to afford. We can do so much better. To all of you watching, we can get back to an America that's affordable again. We just got to get back to common sense economic principles.
We're not
I
going
think we
back.
have a conversation on
Not without ending the
healthcare
Fed.
then.
Senator, Governor.
Please.
Thank you. Margaret?
I agree with you,
We have a
Cheryl.
lot to get to
Cheryl said, "Why
ahead,
can't Trump defend his
gentlemen,
policies
on
like
many
Vance?"
topics, but right now I want to talk about personal qualifications. The vice president is often the last voice the president hears before
Going to
making
bed.
consequential decisions.
It's only if you're a
We want to
CBS
ask
reporter.
you about your leadership qualities. Governor Walz,
This has to be a
you
stolen
said you were in
valor
Hong Kong
moment.
during the deadly Tiananmen Square protests in the spring of 1989. But Minnesota Public Radio and other media outlets are reporting that you actually didn't travel to Asia until August of that year. Can you explain that discrepancy?
Yeah, well, and to the folks out there who
Bad
didn't
at
get
grammar.
at the top of this, look, I
was a grammar
I grew up in
mistake.
small rural Nebraska,
Kamala
town of
class
400,
family.
Middle class family.
town that you rode your bike with your
People
buddies till
love
the
their
street lights
lawns.
come on, and I'm proud of that service. I joined the National Guard at 17, worked on family farms, and then I used the GI Bill to become a teacher, passionate about it, a young teacher. My first year out, I got the opportunity
were you in China?
the summer of '89, China, 35 years ago, be able to do that. I came back home and then started a program to take young people there. We would take basketball teams, we would take baseball teams, we would take dancers, and we would go back and forth to China. The issue for that was to try and learn. Now look, my community knows who I am. They saw where I was at. Look, I will be the first to tell you, I have poured my heart into my community. I've tried to do the best I can, but I've not been
Answer
perfect.
the question you want to
answer.
answer.
I'm a knucklehead at times, but it's always been about that. Those same people elected me to Congress for 12 years. And in Congress, I was one of the most bipartisan people, working on things like farm bills that we got done.
But Tiananmen
working on
Square.
veterans benefits.
Yeah, but about
and
China,
then the people
though.
of Minnesota were able to elect me to governor twice. So look, my commitment
It's really
has
easy.
been
You just
from
say,
the
"I
beginning
misremembered."
to make sure that I'm there for the people.
The Stream
to make
Deck
sure
is
that I get
really
this
nice.
right. I will say more than anything. Many times I will talk a lot. I will get caught up in
Sometimes
the
I
rhetoric.
talk.
But
Yeah, you're
being
doing it
there,
right now,
the
dude.
impact it made,
Say
the
I
difference it made
misspoke.
in my life. I learned a lot about China.
He was
I hear
using the time
critiques
well.
of this. I would make
'Cause you
the
don't wanna
case
just
that
lead
Donald
that.
Trump should have come on one of those trips with us. I guarantee you he wouldn't be praising Xi Jinping about COVID. And I guarantee
What?
you
Did
he
you
wouldn't
ask
start a
Trump to
trade
come?
war that he ends up losing.
Yeah,
So
totally.
this
Trump is
about
so
trying to
pro-China, let me
understand
tell
the
you.
world.
What?
It's about trying to do the best you can for your
That's a
community.
weird
and then it's
ask.
putting
Dude,
yourself
Vance
out
is
there and
gonna
letting your
just
folks
bat this
understand
right
what
around.
it is. My
See if he
commitment,
does the
whether it be
look to
through
camera.
teaching, which I was good at, or whether it was
Vance
being a
also
good
needs to pivot
soldier,
into
or was
stolen
being a good
valor,
member
too.
of Congress.
Like,
Those are the
the
things
one-two
that I think
punch.
are the
This might be
values
the best
that are
opportunity. Something else he lied about.
Governor, just to follow up
1-2
on
punch
that,
it.
Yeah.
the question was, can you
Thank you.
explain the
No, just
discrepancy?
all I said on this was I got there that summer and misspoke on this. So I just
Simple grammar
That's what I
mistake,
said.
really.
Yeah.
That's all it was.
so I
Yeah,
was
his
in
wife's the English teacher. She
Hong
corrects
Kong
his
and
grammar.
China during
Oh, that
the
awkward
democracy
pause was
protest went
awkward.
in. And from that, I learned a lot of what needed to be in governance.
Coach, run the clock out.
Thank
That's
you,
the right
Governor.
idea.
Senator Vance, in 2016, you called your running mate Donald Trump unfit for the nation's highest office, and you said he could be America's Hitler.
Blame the
I know
media.
you said, you've been asked
It's
many
gonna
times,
hit
and
the
you said
media.
you regret those comments and explained you then voted for Donald Trump in 2020. But the Washington Post reported new messages last week in which you also disparaged Trump's economic record while he was president, writing to someone in 2020, quote,
The chat's
Trump
on fire
thoroughly
tonight.
failed to deliver his economic
Somebody don't
populism.
speak good.
Honestly, I just want to do more live streams for the
I don't
chat.
speak
You've
so
shifted
good.
many of your policy stances
National
to align
leader.
with
Sometimes
his.
I just talk
If
out
you
my ass.
become vice
I
president,
know, speak good. I
why
know,
should
speak
Americans trust
I've
that
absorbed
you will
like
give
20%
Donald
of this
Trump
debate
the
'cause I'm just
advice
staring at the
he
chat.
needs to hear, and not just the advice he wants to hear?
Was that my
you have
Discord?
2
Was
minutes.
it somebody
Well,
else?
first of all, Margaret, because I've always been open. And sometimes, of course, I've disagreed with the president, but I've also been extremely open about the fact that I was wrong about Donald Trump. I was wrong, first of all, because I believed some of the media stories that turned out to be dishonest fabrications of his record. But most importantly, Donald Trump delivered
Nice.
to the American people. Rising wages, rising take-home pay, an economy that worked for normal Americans, a secure southern border, a lot of things, frankly, that I didn't think he'd be able to deliver on. And yeah, when you screw up, when you misspeak, when you get something wrong and you change your mind, you ought to be honest with the American people about it. It's
good-
one of the reasons,
good one.
Margaret,
Good
why
one.
I've done so many interviews is because I think it's important
Juxtaposed
to actually
very nicely.
explain to the American people where I come down on the issues and what changed. Now, you pointed out to messages from 2020. Margaret, I've been extremely consistent that I think there were a lot of things that we could have done better in the Trump administration the first round if Congress was doing its job. I strongly believe, and I've been a United States Senator, that Congress is not just a high-class debating society. It's not just a forum for senators and congressmen to whine about problems. It's a forum to govern. So there were a lot of things on the border, on tariffs, for example, where I think that we could have done so much more if the Republican Congress and the Democrats in Congress had been a little bit better about how they govern the country. They were so obsessed with impeaching Donald Trump, they couldn't actually govern. And I want to talk about this tariff issue in particular, Margaret, because Tim just accused this of being a national sales tax. Look, the one thing, and you're probably surprised to hear me praising Joe Biden, but the one thing that Joe Biden did is he continued some of the Trump tariffs that protected American manufacturing jobs. And it's the one issue, the most pro-worker part of the Biden administration, it's the one issue where Kamala Harris has run away from Joe Biden's record. Think about this. If you're trying to employ slave laborers in China at $3 a day, you're going to do that and undercut the wages of American workers unless our our country stands up for itself and says, you're not accessing our markets unless you're paying middle-class Americans a fair wage.
Senator, your time is up. Nora?
Thank you.
I love how they just say
Now the
that
issue of
after he's done
reproductive
speaking.
rights.
Period.
Walz, after Roe
Pause.
versus Wade was overturned,
Okay, now your time
you
is up.
signed a bill
Thanks,
into law
thanks.
You did nail
that
the
made
timing.
Minnesota one of the least restrictive states in the nation when it comes to abortion. Former President Trump said in the last debate that you believe abortion, quote, in the 9th month is absolutely fine. Yes or no? Is that what you support? I'll give you 2 minutes.
That's not what the bill says, but look, this issue is what's on everyone's mind. Donald Trump put this all into motion. He brags about how great it was that he put the judges in and overturned Roe versus Wade, 52 years of personal autonomy. And then he tells us, oh, we send it to the states. It's a beautiful thing. Amanda Zaworski would disagree with you on it's a beautiful thing. A young bride in Texas waiting for their child at 18 weeks. She has a complication, a tear in
I always
the
hate when
membrane.
politicians
She
do
needs
this.
to go in. The medical care
Names some people
at
as
that
pawns.
point needs to be decided by the doctor.
He's like,
It's-
I don't
And
know
that
the
would have been
person.
an
Yeah,
abortion.
but it's compelling
in
storytelling.
Texas,
Yeah.
that would have put
Storytelling.
them in legal jeopardy.
It's always one of those
She
things where
went
I'm like,
home,
I know what you're
got
doing.
sepsis,
Yeah. And
nearly dies, and now
just
she may
know
have
the tactic.
difficulty having children. Or in Kentucky, Hadley Duvall, a 12-year-old child raped and impregnated by her stepfather. Those are horrific. Now, when God asked about that, Senator Vance said, 2 wrongs don't make a right. There is no right in this. So in Minnesota, what we did was restore Roe versus Wade. We made sure that we put women in charge of their health care. But look, this is not where, if you don't know Amanda or a Hadley, you soon will. Their Project 2025 is going to have a registry. of
They said it.
pregnancies.
They said Project
It's going to get
2025.
more difficult, if not impossible, to get contraception and limit access, if not eliminate access to infertility treatments. For so many of you out there listening, me
That's a good
included,
strike.
infertility treatments are why I have a child.
That's probably one of their
That's
best
nobody else's
current,
business.
like,
But those things are
powerful
being
way to
proposed.
sway
And the catch-all
middle
on
class.
this is, well, the states will decide
Fertility
what's
treatments.
right for Texas might not be right for Washington. That's not how this works. This is basic
Yes,
human
it
rights.
is, actually,
We
though.
have seen
It's how the
maternal
Constitution works.
mortality skyrocket
should
in
burn it.
Texas, outpacing many
Yeah,
other
it's
countries in
dangerous.
the world. This is about health care. In Minnesota, we are ranked first in health care for a reason. We trust women. We trust doctors.
Senator, do you want to respond to the governor's claim? Will you create a federal pregnancy monitoring agency?
No, Nora, certainly we won't. And I want to talk about this issue because I know a lot of Americans care about it, and I know a lot of Americans don't agree with everything that I've ever said on this topic. And
Lava
you know,
lamp.
I grew up in a working class family in a neighborhood where I knew a lot of young women who had unplanned pregnancies and decided
If you
to
guys aren't
terminate
checking
those
out this
pregnancies
chat, you're missing it.
because they feel like they didn't have any other
Some
options.
spice, brother.
And
Some
you know,
spice.
one of them is actually very dear to me, and I know she's watching tonight. And I love you.
Evan, I'll explain
and
in the
she told me
break.
something a couple years ago that she felt like if she hadn't had that abortion, that it would have destroyed her life because she was in an abusive relationship. And I think that what I take from that as a Republican who proudly wants to protect innocent life in this country, who proudly wants to protect the vulnerable, is that my party, we've got to do so much better of a job at earning the American people's trust back on this issue where they frankly just don't trust us. And I think that's one of the things that Donald Trump and I are endeavoring to do. I want us as a Republican Party to be pro-family in the fullest sense of the word. I want us to support fertility treatments. I want us to make it easier for moms to afford to have babies. I want it to make it easier for young families to afford a home so they can afford a place to raise that family. And I think there's so much that we can do on the public policy front just to give women more options. Now, of course, Donald Trump has been very clear that on the abortion policy specifically, that we have a big country and it's diverse. And California has a different viewpoint on this than Georgia. Georgia has a different viewpoint from Arizona. And the proper way to handle this, as messy as democracy sometimes is to let voters make these decisions, let the individual states make their abortion policy. And I think that's what makes the most sense in a very big, a very diverse, and let's be honest, sometimes a very, very messy and divided country.
Governor, would you like to respond and also answer the question about restrictions?
Yeah, well, the question got asked, and Donald Trump made the accusation that wasn't true about Minnesota. Well, let me tell you about this idea
That's
that
actually
there's
about your
diverse
personal
states.
beliefs, sir.
There's a young woman named Amber Thurman. She happened to be in Georgia, a restrictive state. Because of that, she had to travel a long distance to North Carolina to try and get her care. Amber Thurman
I just
died
pulled up Trump's
in
Truth
that
Social
journey back and
It's
forth.
pretty lit.
The fact of the matter is, how can we as a nation
Wasn't that
say that
girl's
your life
issue with
and your rights, as
not
basic
with, like,
as the
it
right
was
to
with the
control your
abortion
own
itself.
body, is determined on geography?
Satoshi, there's not
a
enough
very
Bitcoin for
real
that.
chance, had Amber Thurman lived in Minnesota, she would be alive today. That's why the restoration
I'm
of
starting
Roe
to think
versus
this isn't
Wade.
the real
When you
Satoshi.
listen to Vice President
Oh my
Harris
God.
talk about this subject and you hear me talk about it, you hear us talking exactly the same. Donald Trump is trying to figure out how to get the political right of this. I agree with a lot of what Senator Vance said about what's happening. His running mate, though, does not, and that's the problem.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, let me ask you about that. He mentioned, it was, I think, referring to a national ban. In the past, you have supported a federal ban on abortion after 15 weeks. In fact, you said if someone can't support legislation like that, quote, you are making the United States the most barbaric pro-abortion regime anywhere in the entire world. My question is, why have you changed your position?
Well, Nora, first of all, I never supported a national ban. I did when I was running for Senate in 2022 talk about setting some minimum national standard. For example, we have a partial birth abortion ban in place in this country at the federal level. I don't think anybody's trying to get rid of that, or at least I hope not, though I know that Democrats have taken a very radical pro-abortion stance. But Nora, you know, one of the things that changed is in the state of Ohio, we had a referendum in 2023, and the people of Ohio voted overwhelmingly, by the way, against my position. And I think that what I learned from that, Nora, is that we've got to do a better job at winning back people's trust. So many young women would love to have families. So many young women also see an unplanned pregnancy as something that's going to destroy their livelihood, destroy their education, destroy their relationships. And we have got to earn people's trust back. And that's why Donald Trump and I are committed to pursuing pro-family policies, making child care more accessible, making fertility treatments more accessible, because we've got to do a better job at that. And that's what real leadership is.
Governor, your response.
I'm going to respond on the pro-abortion piece of that. No, we're not. We're pro-women. We're pro-freedom to make your own choice. We know what the implications are to not be that. Women having miscarriages, women not getting the care, physicians feeling like they may be prosecuted for providing that care. And as far as making sure that we're educating our children and giving them options, Minnesota's a state with one of the lowest teen pregnancy rates. We understand that too. We know that the options need to be available, and we make that true. We also make it, we're a top 3 state for the best place to raise children. But these two things, to try and say that we're pro-children, but we don't like this, or you guys are pro-abortion, that's not the case at all. We are pro-freedoms for women to make their choices, and we're going, and Kamala Harris is making the case, to make options for children more affordable, a $6,000 child tax credit, but we're not going to base that on the backs of making someone like Amber Thurman drive 600 miles to try and get health care.
Senator?
May I respond to that? First of all, Governor, I agree with you. Amber Thurman should still be alive, and there are a lot of people who should still be alive, and I certainly wish that she was. And maybe you're free to disagree with me on this and explain this to me, but as I read the Minnesota law that you signed into law, the statute that you signed into law, it says that a doctor who presides over an abortion where the baby survives, the doctor is under no obligation to provide life-saving care to a baby who survives a botched late-term abortion. That is, I think,
That's
whether
not
you're
true.
pro-choice or
That's not how the law
pro-abortion,
is.
that is fundamentally barbaric. And that's why I
Is
use
it or
that
is it
word
not how the
more,
law
is because
reads?
some of what we've
Should be
seen,
pretty easy
do
to
you want
verify.
force
I feel like that
Catholic
can be
hospitals to
Think they'll
bring
fact
Maybe
check
we
it?
should check their fact checker
Is
here.
their
Kamala
fact
Harris
checker
has
going to do
supported
it?
suing Catholic nuns to violate their freedom of conscience. We can be a big and diverse country where we respect people's freedom of conscience and make the country more pro-baby and pro-family. But please.
Yes, Governor, please respond.
Look, this is one where there's always something there. This is a very simple proposition. These are women's decisions to make about their health care decisions, and the physicians
Dude,
who
you
know
gotta
best
address
when
it.
they need to
There's
do
a
this.
baby on the
Trying
table. Are you gonna
distort
address
the way
it?
a law is written to try and make a point, that's not it at all.
What was I wrong
This
about,
was-
Governor? Please tell me. What was I wrong
That is
about?
not the way the law
Good to
is
keep
written.
bringing it
Look,
back.
I've given
But
this,
how?
I've given this advice on a lot of things, that getting involved, getting engaged, that's been misread, and it was fact-checked at the last debate. But the point on this is there's a continuation of these guys to try and
fact-checked in the last
tell women or to get involved. I use
the
this line
advantage.
on this, just mind your own business on this. Things work best when Roe versus Wade was in place. When we do a restoration of Roe, that works best. That doesn't preclude us from increasing funding for children. It doesn't increase us from making sure that once that child's born, like in Minnesota, they get meals. They get early childhood education. They get health care. So
we're calling it the Vance glance now, guys. Just coined it. The
Vance
Vance glance.
Proposing him in your budget.
It's a real thing.
She's proposing all those things to make life easier for families.
You see what he's doing? I asked a specific question, Governor. You gave me a slogan as a response.
It's not the case. It's not true. That's not what the law says. So they fact-checked it with President Trump.
Gentlemen, there's a lot to discuss. We
They
have to move on, and we're going to be right back with much more of the CBS News
ABC,
vice presidential
obviously.
debate
Uh-huh.
in just a moment.
Okay, here we go. Break.
All right, here I will.
All
Do you want me to mute it?
I have a quick question for David.
Hit me.
Nope.
I
think he is.
Yeah, I think Bennett's muted.
I did mute you. I was just tired of hearing you breathe into your microphone.
I still don't hear him.
I have not muted you, Bo. It's totally there.
You muted yourself, brother.
Oh, didn't do anything. Sorry. There you are. There
we
go.
Liar.
Yeah, that was me. That's my bad.
David.
No, you're fine.
From
Look, we fact checked this at the last debate. I did not mute you. Okay.
From a viewer voter standpoint, does it make a difference that Vance seems to not be writing things down nearly as much as Walz?
I don't know if that matters.
Like, does that
Depending
make
on
him
delivery.
seem more educated on the top of his head?
Less sure.
He seems more confident.
He
I
seems
would say.
way more confident.
Yeah, right off the bat,
Just in
especially,
general.
and Waltz had to settle in. That's for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, I mean, I think Waltz comes across okay after about the second question.
I think he got rattled at the end there, though, with that abortion one.
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say. I mean, it depends on how much people trust the fact checkers on the last thing he appealed to from the last debate. So a couple of the other issues that were asked. Did I just do the one thing? Okay, weird.
Putting on Bill Leah.
Was the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Waltz note that they didn't make clear how they're going to pay for all these walls. Waltz. Walls.
Well, yeah, like you have to build a walls.
Walls.
You know?
Yeah, walls. Okay.
Yeah.
He didn't make clear how to pay for it. That's obviously because he doesn't care how it's paid for because the deficit doesn't matter. I do want to note, though, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act definitely did cut taxes for small businesses. It applied to tax-through organizations of all kinds. There was a point, and I remember this very clearly because I was like stuck in the middle of the entire fight, where the question was whether or not the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act would apply to pass-throughs or if it was just going to be to corporations. And it was fought for and got changed in the Senate to add pass-throughs. That was Senator Steve Daines actually made that happen. So, like, that's a big deal. And that's why it applied to so many small businesses.
I forgot about that.
Patrick, study on immigration and housing. Now, the trick with the housing cost increase is that there's so many variables that go into the housing crisis that we have right now. Obviously, we look a lot at the supply side. Increasing in demand for housing because of immigrants is a known variable, but it's not understood to what degree that is a more substantial variable than the decrease in supply. And it's a very clear chart that you can track data-wise in the decrease of supply due to increasing zoning regulations, environmental control, building regulations, and that sort of thing. So it's typically, but that is a problem. It's a lamplight phenomenon, right? What we can measure and see is what we address, not what we can't measure and see is quite as well, which is immigrant effect on that. Waltz did have one part on right-to-work states that I want to correct the record on. I think he's wrong about that. Well, at least the way he framed it is wrong. What he said is maybe correct. In right-to-work states, it is harder for unions to exert control over as a cartel, over industry, over individual business, because you can't force the business into the arrangement. So there has to be more cooperative. But that said, union membership does benefit from right-to-work states. It very clearly has in several right-to-work states that were most heavily unionized and then adopted right-to-work. And on fertility and abortions, Evan, fertility treatments and abortion are kind of collated now, and they weren't before because after the Supreme Court killed Roe v. Wade, it went back to the states, right? The left wants to blame Donald Trump for that, and he kind of has taken credit for it and tried to defend it, which I think is wise. When that happened, Alabama passed a pro-life bill. It was found by the Supreme Court of Alabama to apply to embryos that are fertilized in vitro fertilization process. So they take out a bunch of eggs, they fertilize them manually, and then they inject them back into the woman. In that process, some of those eggs don't become viable. So therefore, when those embryos are killed or basically left to not develop or attached to the uterine wall, they die. So they say that that's an abortion in Alabama. that isn't a national-wide thing. It's only Alabama because of the language of that text as interpreted by the Alabama Supreme Court.
I just want to add a little bit of clarity to that last piece about Minnesota law, right?
Mm-hmm.
The best thing that I can find to support J.D. Vance's claim there is that the Minnesota legislature repealed the clause that previously said that infants born alive after an abortion have to be given life-sustaining care.
Mm-hmm.
They repealed the clause in that law. They didn't pass a new law that basically, said that they wouldn't do that. So,
right. And they could have written a bill that maintained the requirement to provide care for botched abortions where the baby survives.
Yes,
They are back.
Here we go.
Back in.
Steals a gun, that's going to be different than if a parent hands over a gun knowing that their kid is potentially dangerous. But look, I want to just sort of speak as a father of 3 beautiful little kids, and our oldest is now in 2nd grade. And like a lot of parents, we send our kids to school with such hope and such joy and such pride at their little faces on the first day of school. And we know, unfortunately, that a lot of kids are going to experience this terrible epidemic of gun violence. And of course, our hearts go out to the families that are affected by this terrible stuff. And we do have to do better. And I think that Governor Walz and I actually probably agree that we need to do better on this. The question is just, how do we actually do it? Now, here's something that really bothers me and worries me about this epidemic of violence. The gross majority, close to 90% in some of the statistics I've seen, of the gun violence in this country is committed with illegally obtained firearms. And while we're on that topic, we know that thanks to Kamala Harris's open border, we've seen a massive influx in the number of illegal guns run by the Mexican drug cartel. So that number, the amount of illegal guns in our country is higher today than it was 3.5 years ago. But what do we do about the schools? What do we do to protect our kids? And I think the answer is, and I say this not loving the answer, because I don't want my kids to go to school in a school that feels unsafe or where there are visible signs of security. But I unfortunately think that we have to increase security in our schools. We have to make the doors lock better. We have to make the doors stronger. We've got to make the windows stronger. And of course, we've got to increase school resource officers, because the idea that we can magically wave a wand and take guns out of the hands of bad guys, it just doesn't fit with recent experience. So we've got to make our schools safer. And I think we've got to have some common sense bipartisan solutions for how to do that.
Governor,
abolish the CIA.
Well, I think all the parents watching tonight, this is
joke.
your biggest
Stop
nightmare.
the MK Ultra program.
I got a 17-year-old, and
Is that where you're going with?
and he witnessed a shooting at a community center playing volleyball. Those things don't leave you. As a member of Congress, I sat in my office surrounded by dozens of the Sandy Hook parents, and they were looking at my 7-year-old picture on the wall. Their 7-year-old were dead, and they were asking us to do something. And look, I'm a hunter. I own firearms. The vice president is.
Good point,
We understand
Cheryl.
that the Second Amendment is there, but our first responsibility is to our kids to figure this out. In Minnesota, we've enacted enhanced red flag laws, enhanced background checks, and we can start to get data. But here's the problem. If we really want to solve this, we've got folks that won't allow research to be even done on gun violence. And this idea that we should just
Won't
live
allow
with it,
research?
and
I don't even
here's what I
understand.
do think, that this is a good start to the conversation. I 100% believe that Senator Vance hates it when these kids, it's abhorrent and it breaks your heart. I agree with that. But that's not far enough when we know there are things that worked. I've spent time in Finland and seen some Finnish schools.
Now say a policy. Say your
They
policy,
don't have
coward.
This happened.
Take
Even though
all
they
the
have a high
guns.
gun ownership rate in the
Yeah.
country.
Well, he's gonna say
there are
banning long
reasonable
rifles.
things that
That's
we
what he's
can
gonna talk
do to make a difference. It's not infringing on your Second Amendment.
Yes, it
And
is.
The
It
idea to
absolutely
have
is.
some of these weapons out there, it just doesn't make any sense. Kamala
here's your
Harris,
chance.
as an
Here's your
attorney
chance,
general,
Walz.
worked on this issue. She knows that it's there. No one's trying to scaremonger and
they're
say
not
we're
gonna be
taking your
specific.
guns, but I
Or
ask
he's
all
not
of
gonna be
you out there,
specific.
do you want your schools hardened to look like a fort? Is that what we have to go? When we know there's countries around the world that their children aren't practicing these types of drills. They're being kids. We owe it to them to get a fix. These are things that shouldn't be that difficult.
So say what
you
your
can
policy
still
is.
keep your firearms, and we can make a difference. We have to. If you're listening tonight, this breaks your heart.
Senator.
Tim, first of all, I didn't know that your 17-year-old witnessed a shooting. And I'm sorry about that, and I hope that he's doing okay. Christ have mercy. It is awful. And I appreciate what Tim said, actually, about Finland, because I do think it illustrates some of the frankly, weird differences between our own country's gun violence problem and Finland. Okay, first of all, we have way higher rates of mental health abuse or mental health substance abuse. We have way higher rates of depression, way higher rates of anxiety. We unfortunately have a mental health crisis in this country that I really do think that we need to get to the root causes of, because I don't think it's the whole reason why we have such a bad gun violence problem, but I do think it's a big piece of it. Another driver of the gun violence epidemic, especially that affecting our kids, it doesn't earn as many headlines, but is the terrible gun violence problem in a lot of our big cities. And this is why we have to empower law enforcement to arrest the bad guys, put them away, and take gun offenders off the streets. I think there's a whole host of things that we can do here, but I do think at our schools we've got to talk about more security.
Senator, thank you. Governor, you previously opposed an assault weapons ban, but it only later in your political career did you change your position. Why?
Yeah, I sat in that office with those Sandy Hook parents. I've become friends with school shooters. I've seen it. Look, the NRA, I was
became friends with school shooters.
I'm of an age
he misspeaks sometimes. Sometimes he just talks.
After football practice.
His wife's going to yell at him about it.
And several things I want to mention on this is
that's gaffy.
Talking about
that's going to be memeable.
The number one where the most firearm deaths happen in Minnesota are rural suicides.
Did I say that?
And we have an epidemic of children getting guns and shooting themselves. And so we have, and we should look at all of the issues. Making sure folks have health care and all that, but I want to be very careful. This idea of stigmatizing mental health, just because you have a mental health issue doesn't mean you're violent. And I think what we end up doing is we start looking for
many of the violent people have mental health issues.
Sometimes it's just the guns.
It's not just the guns.
And there are things that you can
Who's
do about
firing the guns,
but I
Tim?
do think that this is one, and I think this is a healthy conversation. I think there's a capacity to find solutions on this that work, protect Second Amendment, protect our children. That's our priority.
But your entire platform violates the Second Amendment, Tim. What the fuck are you talking about? Sorry, I'm cussing.
The high cost of housing.
It's BS, and like Vance didn't even call him out on it.
Homes in the United States, and that contributes to the high.
Well, they have a lot
crisis.
to get to.
Governor Walz, the Harris campaign promises a $25,000 down payment assistance for first-time home buyers and a $10,000 tax credit. They also promise to build 3 million new homes. Where are you building these homes, and won't handing out that kind of money just drive up prices higher?
No, it's not handing out. We have. First, let me say this. This issue of housing.
Well, nobody told him about that part.
Those of you listening on this. The problem
when you subsidize demand,
that we've got a lot of folks that see housing as another commodity. It can be
also
bought
when you give first-time home buyers $25,000.
Those are not folks living in those houses.
They
those
go on
of
a
you
coke
listening
bender.
tonight, that house is a big deal. I bought and owned one house in my life. My mom still lives in the house where I was. And when I think of a house, I'm thinking of Christmas services after midnight mass where you go with your family. We need to make it more affordable. And one of the things, as I said, this program that the Vice President is pushing forward and bringing a new way of approaching this is something we're doing in Minnesota from that lead. We in the state invested in making sure our housing was the biggest investment that we'd ever made in housing. It starts to make it easier. We cut some of the red tape. Local folks, look, we can't do it at the federal level, but local folks make it easier to build those homes. And then that down payment assistance. I can tell all of you out there, certainly for me, using the GI Bill was one thing, but a veteran's home loan, the big thing about a veteran's home loan is you don't have to pay the down payment. Those are things that make it there. Now, look, you're going to pay it back, and you're going to pay your mortgage. Those are things that we know in the long run, the appreciated value, the generational wealth that's created from it. And I will give Minneapolis an example. Minneapolis is the one city where we've seen the lowest inflation rates. We've seen a 12% increase in stock because we've put some of these things in, and we're implementing a state program to make sure we give some of that down payment assistance.
Houston actually outperforms Minneapolis. I don't think he's right
because
about
here's what we know: people with
I don't think
stable
he's saying it's the
housing
highest.
end up
It
with
might
stable
be up
jobs.
there.
People with stable housing
I have no idea. I don't know
have
the
their
numbers.
kids able to be able to get to school.
I think that's wrong.
All of those
I
things
thought
in
he
the
said
long
the
run
best.
end up saving our money, and that's the thing that I think we should be able to find some common ground in. But we can't blame immigrants for the only reason. That's not the case that's happening in many cities. The fact of the matter is that we don't have enough naturally affordable housing.
My computer
but
just
we
had an
can
issue.
make
Did that
sure
cause a
that the
problem?
government's there to help kickstart it, create that.
I think we're good.
Create that base.
Governor, your time is up. Senator Vance, as far as your campaign's position, the promise is to seize federal lands to build homes, remove regulation, provide tax breaks, and cut back on immigration, which you say pushes up prices.
Ugh.
Where are you going to build
regulation,
all the new homes you're promising? And what part of any of this plan will provide immediate
It's such a dumb
relief?
question. Where are you going to build it?
Well,
Like, that's
first
just
of all,
a retarded question.
Tim just said something that
Wyoming.
I agree with. We don't want to blame immigrants for higher
Like he's
housing
supposed to know
prices,
where
but
they're
we
gonna be
do want
built.
to blame Kamala Harris for letting in millions of illegal aliens into this
Pass the
country,
bill.
which does drive up costs.
That's never
Tim.
gonna happen, Katie.
25 million illegal aliens competing with Americans for scarce homes is one of the most significant drivers of home prices in the country. It's why we have massive increases in home prices that have happened right alongside massive increases in illegal alien populations under Kamala Harris's leadership. Now, Tim just mentioned a bunch of ideas. Now, some of those ideas I actually think are halfway decent, and some of them I disagree with. But the most important thing here is Kamala Harris is not running as a newcomer to politics. She is the sitting vice president. If she wants to enact all of these policies to make housing more affordable, I invite her to use the office that the American people already gave her, not sit
It
around and
wouldn't
campaign and do
work,
nothing
though.
while Americans find the American dream of homeownership completely unaffordable. Now, you asked, Margaret, what would immediately change the equation for American citizens if you lower energy prices? As Donald Trump says, drill, baby, drill. One of the biggest drivers of housing costs, aside from illegal immigration, is, think about it. If a truck driver's paying 40% more for diesel, then the lumber he's delivering to the job site to build the house is also going to become a lot more expensive. If we open up American energy, you will get immediate pricing relief for American citizens, not, by the way, just in housing, but in a whole host of other economic goods, too.
Could talk about land
Senator
management.
Vance, you still
Could
have
talk about actual
23
lumber
seconds there. Do you
cultivation
want to
That's
answer?
not sexy.
I have it.
Where,
It would work so well.
Governor, we will get to you in a moment. But
case where Democrats are
Senator,
weak, too.
where are you going to seize the
Who do
federal
we think is
lands?
winning
Can you
the
clarify?
debate? Like from the
Well, what
normie
Donald Trump has said
perspective.
is we have a lot of
get a
federal
poll in the
lands that
chat,
aren't
see
being
what they
used
think.
for anything.
I
They're
did
not being
earlier,
used for
but
national
this
park. They're not being
audience is
used, and they
skewed,
could be
Vance.
places where we build a
Let's change
lot of
the question.
housing.
What did
And I do
normies
think
think?
that we
What do
should
you
be
think the normies
opening
think?
up building in this country. We have a lot of land that could be used. We have a lot of Americans that need homes. We should be kicking out illegal immigrants who are competing for those homes, and we should be building more homes for the American citizens who deserve to be here.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, I do want to let you respond
many
to the
thoughts about this
allegation
debate.
that
I
the
have
vice
so
president
many
is
thoughts right now.
letting in
Well, of course, that's not
migrants,
true. And again,
that
you
it's
have the
affecting
facts. I
housing
guess we
prices.
agreed not to fact check. I'll check it. That look, crossings are down compared to when Donald Trump left
We
office.
agreed not to fact check.
But it's
They have a
again,
fact checker down on the phone.
not trying to find a solution. I was going to
That's
ask
such an
you on this
infuriating
question,
statement.
Are we going to drill and build houses in the same federal land? And I think when people hear federal lands, these are really important pieces of land. Now, Minnesota doesn't have a lot of federal lands. I know in the western part of the countries we do. There's not a lot of federal lands in and around Minneapolis, for example. So the issue is I don't understand the federal lands issue unless we see this, and I worry about this as someone who cares deeply about our national parks and our federal lands. Look, Minnesota, we protect these things. We've got about 20% of the world's fresh water. These lands protect. They're there for a reason. They belong to all of us. But again, this is when you view housing and you view these things as commodities. Like there's a chance to make money here. Let's take this federal land and let's sell it to people for that. I think there's better ways to do this. We've seen it in Minnesota. We're able to refurbish some of these houses. We're able to make some investments. That gets people in. And I'm still on the fact on this. Economists, Senator Vance, you said you don't like the economists. Which economists are saying that it is immigrants that's adding to the cost?
Governor,
Where's
your
the study?
time is up. But Senator, on that point, I'd like for you to clarify. There are many contributing factors to high housing costs. What evidence do you have that migrants are part of this problem?
Well, there's a Federal Reserve study that we're happy to share after the debate. We'll put it up on social media, actually, that really drills down on the connection between increased levels of migration, especially illegal immigration, and higher housing prices. Now, of course, Margaret, that's not the entire driver of higher housing prices. It's also the regulatory regime of Kamala Harris. Look, we are a country of builders. We're a country of doers. We're a country of explorers. But we increasingly have a federal administration that makes it harder to develop our resources, makes it harder to build things, and wants to throw people in jail for not doing everything exactly as Kamala Harris says they have to do. And what that means is that you have a lot of people who would love to build homes homes who aren't able to build homes. I actually agree with Tim Walz. We should get out of this idea of housing as a commodity. But the thing that has most turned housing into a commodity is giving it away to millions upon millions of people who have no legal right to be here.
What are the federal regulations? I deal with this as a governor.
You can very quickly reply.
I'm sorry. I get this as a governor, and I don't necessarily disagree with that in some cases, many of those are local, many of them are state. I don't know which ones are federal, but I think whenever we talk regulations, people think they can get rid of them. I think you want to be able to get out of your house in a fire. I think you want to make sure that it's fireproof and those types of things. So which are the regulations? Because the vice president's not responsible for those. Congress writes those.
Governor, thank you.
Environmental impact. That's
we
the
have a
regulation.
lot to
That's
get
the
to. You're
federal
passionate
regulation that
about the
drives up the
housing
cost of these
crisis,
developments.
I can tell. But Nora?
Thank you. One of the top problems facing Americans is the high cost of health care. Senator Vance, at the last presidential debate, former President Trump was asked about replacing the Affordable
Katie
Care
was saying
Act.
in the chat that she
in
thinks
response, he said,
there's too
I have
much
concepts
criticizing
of a plan. Since then,
Harris
Senator,
for
you've
policy
talked
she
about
hasn't
changing
done
how
yet.
chronically ill
'Cause that's something
Americans
that's
get
being
health
really hit.
insurance. Can you explain
how close do you
that
think
would
people
work?
are with
And can you
how much do
guarantee that
people actually
Americans
tie
with
Harris to Biden?
pre-existing conditions-
Good question.
I think that's like on a broad
I'll give you 2 minutes.
conversation, right?
Yeah.
We're going to cover Americans with pre-existing conditions. In fact, a lot of my family members have gotten health care. I believe, members of my family actually got private health insurance, at least for the first time, switched off of Medicaid onto private insurance for the first time under Donald Trump's leadership. And I think that, a lot of people have criticized this concepts of a plan remark. It's very simple common sense. I think as Tim Walz knows from 12 years in Congress, you're not going to propose a 900-page bill standing on a debate stage. It would bore everybody to tears, and it wouldn't actually mean anything because part of this is the give and take of bipartisan negotiation. Now, when Donald Trump was actually president, and again, he has a record to be proud of, prescription drugs fell in 2018 for the first time in a very long time. Under Kamala Harris's leadership, prescription drugs are up about 7%. Under Donald Trump's entire 4 years, they were up about 1.5%. He introduced pricing transparency. Think about healthcare. You go into a hospital, you try to buy something, and nobody knows what it actually costs. That price transparency will actually give American consumers a little bit more choice and will also drive down costs. And we talked about, the reinsurance regulations is what I was talking about. Look, Donald Trump has said that if we allow states to experiment a little bit on how to cover both the chronically ill but the non-chronically ill, it's not just a plan. He actually implemented some of these regulations when he was president of the United States. And I think you can make a really good argument that it salvaged Obamacare, which was doing disastrously until Donald Trump came along. And I think this is an important point about President Trump. Of course, you don't have to agree with everything that President Trump has ever said or ever done.
No, you have
but
to.
when Obamacare was crushing under the weight of its own regulatory burden and healthcare costs, Donald Trump could have destroyed the program. Instead, he worked in a bipartisan way to ensure that Americans had access to affordable care. It's not perfect, of course, and there's so much more that
Trump
we can
tweeted
do,
out second
but I
time
think
he
that
has
Donald
said,
Trump
"I've been
has
friends with
earned
school
the right
shooters."
to
What
put
does he
in
mean
place
by this?
some
Is
better
he
healthcare
insane?
policies. He's earned it because he did it successfully the first time.
Governor?
All right, here's where being an old guy gives you some history. I was there at the creation of the
Everything.
ACA.
Oh, he's
and
pulling-
the reason
he's
it was
pulling
so
rank.
important is I come from a major healthcare state, home of the Mayo Clinic, home to Medical Alley. 3M,
Well, you can't be old.
Medtronic, all of those. We
They hit Trump
understand
for being
healthcare.
old.
It's why we're ranked first on affordability and accessibility
Fair point,
and quality
fair point.
of healthcare. And so what
Adam's
I know
demanding
is
a
under
rant,
Kamala
Dave.
Harris,
You got to rant.
more people are covered.
What
than
happened
they
to keep
have
your
before. Those
doctor,
of you listening,
Walz?
this is critical.
You could keep your
Now,
insurance
Donald Trump
provider.
all
What
of a
happened to all
sudden
those cheap
wants
insurance
to go back
providers?
and
They all went
remember
out of
this.
business.
He ran
Thanks to the
on
ACA.
The first
So
thing he was
this
going to
is-
do on day one.
And I'm a little
was to
disappointed Vance isn't actually
repeal
attacking the
Obamacare.
ACA.
On day one, he tried to
But
sign an
he wouldn't
executive order
because-
to repeal the ACA. He signed on to a lawsuit to repeal the
It sounds like
ACA,
he's in the room
but
with
lost
us.
at the Supreme Court.
Andrew Tate.
And he would
Did
have
Tampon Tim just say he
repealed
was-
the ACA
he has
had
become
it not
friends
been
with
for the
school
courage of
shooters?
John McCain to save that bill.
Donald Trump.
Now, fast forward. What that means to you is you lose your pre-existing conditions. If you're sitting at home and you got asthma, too bad. If you're a woman, probably not. Broke your foot
Nice
during
one, Kaylee.
football.
You're right,
might kick
Cheryl.
you out.
He is
Your
explain- he
kids
is
get
defending
kicked out
Trump
when
better than
they're
Trump
26.
defends himself.
Kamala Harris negotiated drug prices for the first time with Medicare. We have 10 drugs that will
Vance
come
is just
online.
more precise
Most
as
common
a
ones
whole.
that'll be there. But look, this issue.
more
and when Donald
typical
Trump said,
politician.
I've got a concept
Both
of a
of them
plan.
are.
It cracked me up as a fourth grade teacher because my kids would have never given me that. But what Senator Vance just explained might be worse than a concept, because what he explained is pre-Obamacare. And I'll make this as simple as possible because I have done this for a long time. What they're saying is, if you're healthy, why should you be paying more? So what they're going to do is let insurance companies pick who they insure, because guess what happens? You pay your premium, it's not much. They figure they're not going to have to pay out to you. But those of you a little older, gray, got cancer, you're going to get kicked out of it. That's why the system didn't work.
Fleecing the young to pay for the wealthy old is what he's
Senator,
advocating for.
Senator, you have not yet explained how you would.
That's why young people can't get insurance and they're on Medicaid now.
Or laid out that plan.
Well, look, we currently have laws and regulations in place right now that protect people with pre-existing conditions. We want to keep those regulations in place, but we also want to make the health insurance marketplace function a little bit better. Now, what Governor Walz just said is actually not true. A lot of what happened and the reason that Obamacare was crushing
Trump's tweets are going to be more viral than anything here.
A lot of young and healthy people were leaving the exchanges. Donald Trump actually helped address that problem, and he did so in a way that preserved people's access to coverage who had pre-existing conditions. But again, something that these guys do is they make a lot of claims about if Donald Trump becomes president, all of these terrible consequences are going to ensue. But in reality, Donald Trump was president. Inflation was low. Take-home pay was higher. And he saved the very program from a Democratic administration that was collapsing and would have collapsed absent his leadership. He did his job, which is govern in a bipartisan way and get results, not just complain about problems, but actually solve them.
Governor, did enrollment under the Affordable Care Act go up under the Trump administration?
It's higher now that we've seen it go up. Look, people are using it.
It continues to go up because more people are going into Medicaid because they're poor.
That's the individual mandate piece of this. And Republicans fought tooth and nail saying, well, Americans should be free to do this. Well, then what happens is...
So you think the individual mandate's a good idea?
I think the idea of making sure the risk pool is broad enough to cover the only way insurance works. When it doesn't, it collapses. You are asking pre-ACA where we get people out. Look, people know that they need to be on health care.
Individual
people
mandates
expect it to be there. And when we are able to make it, and we are making it this way, when we incentivize people to be in the market, when we help people who might not be able to afford it get there.
How about we incentivize people to be healthy?
When you get sick and
novel
old,
idea.
it's there for you.
Make America healthy.
No, what you need to do is fleece young people and give it to boomers. Duh. Because they're the biggest voting bloc. That's how you win.
Works. We can continue to do better. Kamala Harris did that. The way she made everything
a lot changes
better
when that
was
generation's
negotiating
done.
those 10 drugs on
All the
Medicare for
incentives
the first time in America.
We'll do the same thing probably.
Thank you. Margaret,
can I address that?
I apologize. We're out of time.
We have a lot to get to.
Discuss.
Yeah,
Margaret, let's
sorry,
talk
there's
about
just so
families
much going
in
on.
America.
You brought up the individual mandate. Can you talk about it now?
There is a child care crisis in this country, and the United States is one of the very few developed countries in the world without a national paid leave program for new parents. Governor Walz, you said that if Democrats win both the White House and Congress, this is a day one priority for you. How long should employers be required to pay workers while they are home taking care of their newborns? You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, that's negotiable, and that's what Congress worked. But here's what the deal is. Americans sitting out there right now, you may work for a big company. Look, we're home in Minnesota to some of the largest Fortune 500 companies. Kamala Harris knows that in California. Those companies provide paid family and medical leave. One is, I think they're moral and they think it's a good thing, but it also keeps their employees healthy. We in Minnesota passed a paid family and medical leave. You have a child, and I had to go back to work 5 days after my kids were born. This allows you to stay home a certain amount of time. What we know is that gets the child off to a better start. The family works better. We stay in their employers. We get more consistency.
Forces the business
to Kamala Harris has made it a priority. We implemented it in Minnesota, and we see growth. That's how you become a pro-business state. But the negotiations on it, and here's the issue. Those big companies are able to offer it. Those of you out there who don't have it, just imagine what happens if you get cancer or your child gets sick. We know what happens. You end up staying home. In some places, that means no paycheck because you've got no protection on that. This is the case of an economy that Donald Trump has set for the wealthiest amongst us. He's willing to give those tax breaks to the wealthiest. He's willing to say, bust those unions up, do whatever. What we're saying is the economy works best when it works for all of us. So a paid family medical leave program, and I will tell you, go to the families or go to the businesses and ask them. As far as childcare on this, you have to
New
take
poll
it
in the
at both
chat.
supply
How many people
and the
would rather
demand
Bennett
side.
just
You
stream
can't
deck
expect
and
the
not
most
talk
important
ever?
people in our lives to take either our children or our parents to get paid the least amount of money. And we have
I know
to
there's a
make it
debate
easier
going on
for
in the
folks
chat on
to
whether or
be
not
able to
McCain
get
was
into
human
that
or an
business
animal.
and then to make sure that
So
folks
I'm
are
going to
able
let that
pay for
roll, I
We
think.
were able to do it in Minnesota, and I'm still
Hey, you
proud
gotta-
of
you gotta entertain
we
yourself
were listed
somehow.
as the best state. We're still in crisis on this. A federal program of paid family and medical leave and help with this will enhance our workforce, enhance our families, and make it easier to have the children that you want.
And increase our
Governor,
debt
your
and
time
inflation.
is up. Senator, do you support
The federal
a
government's not
national
gonna pay
paid
for
leave
this. They're gonna force
program?
businesses
and
to pay
if
for it.
so, for how long should employers be mandated to pay their employees
least you
while they are
use the
home
right
taking
word.
care of their newborn? You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, first of all, Margaret, a number of my Republican colleagues and some Democrats, too, have worked on this issue. And I think there is a bipartisan solution here because a lot of us care about this issue. I mean, look, I speak from this very personally because I'm married to a beautiful woman who is an incredible mother to our 3 beautiful kids, but is also a very, very brilliant corporate litigator. And I'm so proud of her. But being a working mom, even for somebody with all of the advantages of my wife, is extraordinarily difficult. And it's not just difficult from a policy perspective. She actually had access to paid family leave because she worked for a bigger company. But the cultural pressure on young families and especially young women, I think makes it really hard for people to choose the family model they want. A lot of young women would like to go back to work immediately. Some would like to spend a little time home with the kids. Some would like to spend longer at home with the kids. We should have a family care model that makes choice possible. And I think this is a very important substantive difference between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris's approach. I mean, look, if you look at the federal programs that we have that support paid family leave right now, the Community Development Block Grant, and there's another block grant program that spends a lot of money from the federal government. These programs only go to one kind of child care model. Let's say you'd like your church maybe to help you out with child care. Maybe you live in a rural area or an urban area and you'd like to get together with families in your neighborhood to provide child care in the way that makes the most sense. You don't get access to any of these federal monies. We want to promote choice in how we deliver family care and how we promote child care because, look, it is unacceptable. And, you know, of course, Tim and I have been on the campaign trail a lot the past 7 or 8 weeks.
Very
and
important
one of the
poll I
biggest
just put up in the
complaints I
chat,
hear
guys.
from young families is
I need you to answer.
people who feel like they don't
I need your
have
opinions.
options, like they're choosing between going to work or taking care for their kids. That is an incredible burden to put on American families. We're the only country that does it. I think we could do a heck of a lot better.
Senator, thank you. You have also said, Senator Vance, many things about the American family. The Federal Reserve says parents will spend nearly as much on child care as they do on housing each month. So I want to get your thoughts on this. President Trump recently said, as much as child care is talked
Big
about as
Seppi in
being
the chat. Walz is
expensive,
definitely the
it's
guy who bought the goofy
relatively
head for
speaking,
19K.
not very expensive compared to the kinds of numbers we'll be taking in. Is
Oh,
President
Katie says he's
Trump
amphibian.
committed to
Would
the
it- would that be a
$5,000 per
scaly?
child tax credit that you have described?
Amphibians don't have scales.
You have one
No,
minute.
that would be
Well, what President
reptiles.
Trump
Yeah.
said,
It's
Margaret, I
reptilian.
just want to defend my running mate here a
No.
little bit, is that we're going to be taking
Kyle,
in
I
a lot
sent
of
you a
money
message
by
in Discord.
penalizing companies for shipping jobs overseas and penalizing countries who employ slave
don't have
laborers
Discord
and
open.
then ship
For
their products back into
for
our country
notifications.
and undercut the wages of American workers. It's the heart of the Donald Trump economic plan. Cut taxes for American workers and American families. Cut taxes for businesses that are hiring and building companies in the United States of America, but penalize companies and countries that are shipping jobs overseas. That's the heart of the economic proposal. And I think what President Trump is saying is that when we bring in this additional revenue with higher economic growth, we're going to be able to provide paid family leave, child care options that are viable
Joe just
and
asked
workable
AI
for a lot
if
of American families.
Tim Walz was a furry, and I think we got an answer.
Can you clarify how that will solve the child care
The bow tie.
shortage?
It needs to be more of a grumpy cat
Well,
than
because
that guy,
as
you know?
Tim said, a lot of the child care shortage is we just don't have enough resources
Interesting.
going into the multiple
We'll continue to
people who
research.
could be providing family care options. And we're going to have to, unfortunately, look, we're going to have to spend more money. We're going to have to induce more people to want to provide child care options for American
I have
families.
some thoughts on this,
'Cause the
Hannah,
reason
about how
it's
you
so
could probably
expensive right
structure
now
one
is
that would
because you've got
be
way too
less
few people
damaging to
providing this
small
very
business.
essential service.
In theory.
Thank you, Senator. Governor Walz, your ticket also has some child care tax credit proposals. Do you think Congress will agree to the $6,000 credit for newborns and $3,000 credit for children over the age of 6, as your campaign has
amphibian,
promised?
interesting.
Is that realistic?
Well, if these members of Congress are listening to anybody, I can tell you, and this is the biggest issue. Everybody listening tonight knows. I mean, I'm sure they were shocked to hear it's not that expensive. And let's be clear, whether it's $5,000 or $6,000, that pays you about 3 or 4 months. Let's be clear of where we're at on this. It's because we got out of an imbalance on this. We thought we were going to get by not paying people. I don't think Senator Vance and I are that far apart. I'm not opposed to what he's talking about on options. We've done scholarship types of things. I think we need to be open to making the case. But the issue here is, the question you asked is, you're not going to pay for it with these tariffs. That's just adding another $4,000 on the family and taking less. So not only do they not get the money,
I kind of thought the last one was better.
$4,000 in the hole.
That's but I think one's too cool. I think we got to research this amphibian thing first next.
Those members of Congress, I can't believe they're not here. When I go to businesses, sure, they'll talk about taxes sometime, but they will lead with childcare and they will lead with housing.
And
because
regulations?
we know the problem is, especially in a state like Minnesota, we need more workers because our economy's growing, but we need the workforce.
Governor, thank you. We need to move on. Nora?
Let's talk about the state of democracy. The top
Don't worry,
issue
we're looking
for
into the frog thing
Americans
for you
after
guys.
the economy
We're looking into
and
it
inflation.
as we speak.
After the 2020 election, President
Porky
Trump's
the Pig from Looney
I don't want to
Tunes.
hear this
filed
one.
62
Porky the Pig from Looney Tunes
lawsuits
makes sense too.
contesting the results. Judges, including those appointed by President Trump and other Republican presidents, looked at the evidence and said there was no widespread fraud. The governors of every state in the nation, Republicans and Democrats, certified the 2020 election results and sent a legal slate of electors to Congress for January 6th. Senator Vance, you have said you would not have certified the last presidential election and would have asked the states to submit alternative electors. That has been called unconstitutional and illegal. Would you again seek to challenge this year's election results, even if every governor certifies the results? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, Nora, first of all, I think that we're focused on the future. We need to figure out how to solve the inflation crisis caused by Kamala Harris's
Guys, I'll
policies.
say the research into the frog thing is
make
going
groceries
quite
affordable,
well.
And that's what we're focused on. But I want to answer your question because you did ask it. Look, what President Trump has said is that there were problems in 2020. And my own belief is that we should fight about those issues, debate those issues peacefully in the public square, and that's all I've said, and that's all that Donald Trump has said. Remember, he said that on January the 6th, the protesters ought to protest peacefully. And on January the 20th, what happened? Joe Biden became the president. Donald Trump left the White House. And now, of course, unfortunately, we have all of the negative policies that have come from the Harris-Biden administration.
I got to look up. Give me the surprise
that we
face.
do have a threat to democracy in this country, but unfortunately, it's not the threat to democracy that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz want to talk about. It is the threat of censorship. It's Americans casting aside lifelong friendships.
Would it look better if he
because of
just shaved his
disagreements
head?
over
Just went all
politics.
bald?
Okay, that's good. I got another one for you.
Technology companies silencing their fellow citizens.
Oh, man.
And it's Kamala
I got another
Harris
one for you.
saying that rather than debate and persuade her fellow Americans, she'd like to censor people who engage in misinformation. I think that is a much bigger threat to democracy than anything that we've seen in this country
Censorship
in the
industrial
last
complex.
4 years, in the last 40 years. I'm really proud, especially given that I was raised by 2 lifelong blue-collar Democrats, to have the endorsement of Bobby Kennedy Jr.
That's legitimately good. You
lifelong leaders in the Democratic coalition. Of course, they don't agree with me and Donald Trump on every issue.
Do you think that works, guys?
Every issue, but we're united behind a basic American
Okay,
First
pull it down.
Amendment
He's talking about
principle
good stuff
that we
right
ought to debate our differences. We ought to argue about them. We ought to try to persuade our fellow Americans. Kamala Harris is engaged in censorship at an industrial scale. She did it during COVID. She's done it over a number of other issues. And that, to me, is a much bigger threat to democracy than what Donald Trump said when he said that protesters should peacefully protest on January the 6th.
Governor?
Well, I've enjoyed tonight's debate, and I think there was a lot of commonality here. And I'm sympathetic to misspeaking on things, and I think I might have with the senator.
Me too, man.
There's one though that this one is troubling to me, and I say that because I think we need to tell the story. Donald Trump refused to acknowledge this, and the fact is that I don't think we can be the frog in the pot and let the
The frog in the pot.
We just had our cat moment.
You are the frog. Some with the American flag, several later. In Minnesota, a group gathered on the state capitol grounds in St. Paul and said,
That's
"We're
gorgeous.
marching to the governor's
That's just
residence,"
pure
and there may
poetry
be
right there.
That was just synchronicity.
And there was my son and his dog who was rushed out crying by state police. That issue, and Mike Pence standing there, they were chanting, "Hang Mike Pence." Mike Pence made the right decision. So, Senator, it was adjudicated over and over and over. I worked with kids long enough to know, and I said as a football coach, sometimes you really want to win, but the democracy is bigger than winning an election. You shake hands,
that was
and then you try and do everything you can to help the other side win. That's what was at stake here. Now, the thing I'm most concerned about is
that was some mimetic energy right there. Holy.
questioning your political opponent, already laying the groundwork for people not accepting this. And a president's words matter. A president's words matter.
Dude, imagine if he said that,
hear that
when I
So
had the picture up.
I think this issue of settling our differences at the ballot box, shaking hands when we lose, being honest about it, but to deny what happened on January 6th, the first time in American history that a president or anyone tried to overturn a fair election and the peaceful transfer of power. And here we are 4 years later in the same boat. I will tell you this, that when this is over, we need to shake hands this election, and the winner needs to be the winner. This has got to stop. It's tearing our country apart.
Margaret? Senator Vance, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, well, look, Tim, first of all, it's really rich for Democratic leaders to say that Donald Trump is a unique threat to democracy when he peacefully gave over power on January the 20th, as we have done for 250 years in this country. We are going to shake hands after this debate and after this election. And of course, I hope that we win, and I think we're going to win. But if Tim Walz is the next vice president, he'll have my prayers, he'll have my best wishes, and he'll have my help whenever he wants it. But we have to remember that for years in this country, Democrats protested the results of elections. Hillary Clinton in 2016 said that Donald Trump had the election stolen by Vladimir Putin because the Russians bought like $500,000 worth of Facebook ads. This has been going on for a long time.
He's like,
I
what?
want to say
Frogs.
we need to respect the
That is a
results of the
frog face.
election.
Look at that face.
I'm on board.
That's it,
We
right
gotta say,
there.
as Tim Walz is
That's
saying,
the
that
face.
This is just a problem that
Look back at the camera, Tim.
I don't buy that.
Look at me, Tim.
Governor.
January 6th was not Facebook. And I think of revisionist history on this. Look, I
This has gone off the rails.
don't understand how we got
That's
to
why we do
point.
this.
But the issue was that happened. Donald Trump can do it. And all of us say there's no place for this. It has massive repercussions. This idea that there's censorship to stop people from threatening to kill someone, threatening to do something, that's not censorship. Censorship is book banning. We've seen that.
Censorship
We've seen that brought up. I just think
is the censorship
for
industrial
everyone
complex
tonight,
you're just
and
ignorant of
I'm gonna
or pretending you don't know
Senator
about.
Vance, I think this is the conversation they want to hear. And I think there's a lot of agreement. But this is one that we are miles apart on. This was a threat to our democracy in a way that we had not seen. And it manifested itself
Vance
because
glance.
of Donald Trump's
Vance glance.
inability to say. He is still saying he didn't lose the election. I would just ask that. Did he lose the 2020 election?
Tim, I'm focused on the future. Did Kamala
Adam
Harris
in the
censor
chat.
Americans from speaking their mind in the wake of the 2020 COVID situation?
That is
Has she tried
that is a damning non-answer.
It's a damning non-answer for you to not talk about censorship. Obviously, Donald Trump and I think that there were problems in 2020. We've talked about it. I'm happy to talk about it further. But you guys attack us for not believing in democracy. The most sacred right under the United States democracy is the First Amendment. You yourself have said there's no First Amendment right to misinformation. Kamala Harris wants to use the
threatening or
power
hate
of
speech.
government and big tech to silence people from speaking their minds. That is a threat to democracy that will long outlive this present political moment. I would like Democrats and Republicans to both reject censorship. Let's persuade one another. Let's argue about ideas, and then let's come together afterwards.
You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. That's the test.
David, get him.
Fire in a crowded theater. You guys wanted to kick people off of Facebook for saying that toddlers shouldn't
Senator,
wear
the
masks.
governor does
That's
have the
not
floor.
Fire in a crowded theater. That is criticizing the policies of the government, which is the right of every American.
Senator, the governor does have the floor for 1 minute to
Please.
respond to you.
Yeah. Well, I don't run Facebook. What I do know is I see a candidate out there.
See, Democrats just
who
pretend
refused,
that
and
they
now,
didn't
again,
actually have a
I'm pretty
disinformation
shocked by
governance
this.
board
He lost the
2
election.
seconds ago.
This is not a debate. It's
Does everyone
not-
remember that board?
It's not anything
No?
anywhere.
Yeah, that creepy
other
lady who
than
sang the
in
song.
Donald
She was at the
Trump's
head of
world.
it.
Because look, when Mike Pence made that decision to certify that election, that's why Mike Pence isn't on this stage. What I'm concerned about is where is the firewall with Donald Trump? Where is the firewall if he knows
The firewalls?
he could do anything,
wall.
including taking an election and his vice president's not going to stand to it. That's what we're asking you, America. Will you stand up? Will you keep your oath of office, even if the president doesn't? And I think Kamala Harris would agree. She wouldn't have picked me if she didn't think I would do that, because of course that's what we would do. So America, I think you've got a really clear choice on this election of who's going to honor that democracy and who's going to honor Donald Trump.
Governor, your time is up. Thank you, gentlemen. We will be right back with both of our candidates. The CBS
Go
News
off, Queen.
Vice Presidential.
All right.
debate.
All right.
So I can just feel David stewing.
I'm
for
just like,
30
oh
minutes.
man. Well, it's so frustrating because it's so close. Like he didn't. Really wish he would have used the Disinformation Governance Board as his attack in there, because it would have grounded Kamala Harris as a feature of the censorship industrial complex. And he also didn't use that word, which would obviously it highlights the reporting and draws attention to legitimate reporting rather than looking like he's just accusing Kamala Harris of running Facebook or whatever disinformation that Walz put out.
Guys, I just
Frustrating.
It is frustrating, but I can't
So close.
overlook how amazing this chat is, you guys. We just manifested frog energy into a vice presidential debate. That is some real shit, and you guys should be damn proud of yourselves.
I'm going to be honest. I've paid 20. I've paid 20% of attention to this debate. I've just been like thinking about frogs for the past hour.
Oh wow, that was insane.
Geez.
That was something.
I actually
there.
feel like it deserves the full thing.
They turn the frickin' frogs.
There it is. There it
Yeah,
is.
yeah.
Well,
Alex
there
Jones.
was conversation in here about like the closeted nature of Tim Walz, so it makes sense.
Yeah.
frogs.
Oh.
Astrazine in the water. You know.
Wow.
He does, as Adam said, he does
Oh, that
seem like
farm
he
water,
goes
you know what
both
I mean?
ways.
Going down the frog hole now, you guys.
So Kaylee has an interesting question. Interested to hear thoughts on how much everyone thinks cancel culture and the inability to have friendly debate is due to Trump talking over everyone during the debates over the last 8 years.
Good question. Good
I
question.
kind of feel like cancel culture started before that, though.
Yeah, I mean,
very
I think you're right. I think that's definitely true. I mean, and I would say it seems like it originated more on the left, right? Like, I mean, Trump probably exacerbated it because he triggered so many progressives and he was such an easy target for them. But I feel like it was, it generated somewhere else.
Well, Trump broke the norms of what's allowed in a lot of ways, and then it just kind of made the other side go exponentially crazier, even though prior to Trump, a lot of the cancel culture stuff really started brewing in 2013, 2014. That's kind of where I always clock it.
Yeah.
So it's pre-Trump in that time.
It depends on how you kind of think of cancel culture, too. The right wing was the cancel culture group in the 1990s, right? Along with Tipper Gore on the left wing, right? There was that. It just was focused on video games and music and social phenomena because we didn't have social media, right?
Well,
Right.
Joe's anti-video games. So.
Yeah.
And I vote.
Unfortunately, there's a war on gamers out there.
So, like, is it worse under Trump? I think it's worse under because of social media, right? But that's also because it's better because you then
You
have the
see
moment
that
where you have
comment?
diverse thoughts.
Yeah.
Joe, there's a Kaylee has a merch idea.
Okay, hit me.
That might-
It's in the chat.
Dude,
Will
that-
you make an HR dad hat with a frog?
Dude, should
Yes.
that be the merch drop?
All right, everybody, you heard it here first. The exclusive HR members only merch is now going to be a dad hat with a frog on it. Thanks, Kaylee. Oh, that's genius.
We should incorporate some frogs into the.
Can we get somebody to
branding.
clip that really quick and get it on Twitter right now? Because that is
Yeah.
so hot, right? I mean, we are literally the only podcast in the world that had frogs at the moment. He said frogs.
That was
Come on,
so
that
funny.
Yeah, we
Genius.
were the only ones with that bingo card.
Nobody else put that on their bingo card. Is he going to say frogs? Should we add that to the bingo card?
So,
Wow.
the question, does it seem like there's any kill shots here? Like major, like, got him kind of attacks?
Well,
that's what I'm not seeing. It
the
seems-
only thing
Tim
that
Walz
I-
kill shotted himself. I'm sorry. When he said he's friends with school shooters, that was a whoa.
I think that might become a meme moment. Like, that's the most memeable.
Yeah, it didn't feel kill shotty,
but
though.
But a kill shot is like, where,
Like,
ooh, you got him. That sort of
pun
thing.
Well, yeah,
Pun
I know what you
not
mean,
intended.
but still, I think
Yeah.
at least he shot himself in the foot on that one.
Yeah, I
if
think
we
it'll be
wanna
a feature
continue
of
the
how people
analogy.
remember the debate if you're online. Yeah.
There's some moments that are like, he really didn't answer the question type of deals where it's like, but like, what about
Well,
the China thing?
the
You know,
China-
like,
the
that type
China
of-
thing
But like,
was,
those aren't
yeah.
kill shots. It's just kind of like, well, okay, that's a thing that he's dodging. You know?
They're back.
Here we go.
It's hard
Welcome
to make a
back to
non-answer.
CS News
until
Vice
shot.
Presidential Debate. It is now time for the closing statement. Senator Vance won the virtual coin toss and elected to go last. So, Governor Walz, you are first.
And most importantly, thank you to all of you. If you're still up and the folks who miss Dancing with Our Stars, I appreciate it. But look, the support of the democracy matters. It matters that you're here. And I'm as surprised as anybody of this coalition that Kamala Harris has built, from Bernie Sanders to Dick Cheney to Taylor Swift, and a whole bunch of folks in between there.
Wow.
And they don't all agree. And then
I'm getting
spent
warnings.
4 years trying to maybe do that. Senator Vance tonight made it clear he will stand with Donald Trump's agenda. He will continue to push down that road. Excuse me.
Feeling a little froggy there,
Kamala
Tim?
Harris gives us a different option. Now, I'll have to tell you, I'm going to be careful about the quotes, but there's one that Senator Vance said that does resonate with me. He said Donald Trump makes the people I care about afraid. A lot of America feels that
it
way.
says it's going slow
We
over
don't
here.
need to be afraid. Franklin Roosevelt was right. All we have to fear is fear itself. Kamala Harris is bringing us a new way forward. She's bringing us a politics of joy. She's bringing real. Everybody gets fifth for Kamala Harris.
Governor Walz,
Says
thank
the
you.
cash is
Senator Vance,
74%,
your closing
Joe.
statement.
Well, I want to thank Governor Walz, you folks at CBS, and of course the American people for tuning in this evening. And one of the issues we didn't talk about was energy. And I remember when I was being raised by my grandmother.
Yeah, we did.
When she didn't have
Looks
enough
like the
money to
encoder
turn
brought
on
it
the
up.
heat
Yep.
some
They didn't really
nights
ask any
because
energy
Ohio
questions.
gets pretty cold at night and because money was often very tight. And I believe, as a person who wants to be your next vice president, that we are a rich and
Sam says
prosperous enough
YouTube's frog
country where
throttling.
every American, whether they're rich or poor, ought to be able to turn on their heat in the middle of a cold winter night. That's gotten more difficult thanks to Kamala Harris's energy policies. I believe that whether you're rich or poor, you ought to be able to afford a nice meal for your family.
Should the
That's
cash
gotten
be
harder
low or
because
high?
of Kamala Harris's policies. I believe that whether you're rich or poor, you ought to be able to afford to buy a house. You ought to be able to live in safe neighborhoods. You ought to not have your communities flooded with fentanyl. And that, too, has gotten harder with Kamala because of Kamala Harris's policies. Now, I've once before and did it well.
Let us know if the
Please vote
buffering
for
stops.
Donald Trump. And whether you vote for me or vote for Tim Walz, I just want to say I'm so
Seems
proud
like
to
it's
be
going
doing
back and
this,
forth
and
on
I'm
my
rooting
end.
for you. God bless you.
Senator Vance, thank you. And thank you both for participating in the only vice presidential debate of this election cycle.
Thanks
I'm
to
Margaret
Biden.
Brennan.
And I'm Nora O'Donnell. And a reminder, there are just 35 days until Election Day. Please get out and vote. And for all of us here
Quick review.
at CBS
Why is
News,
it there's only one presidential debate and one vice debate? Because the Democrat Party made it so. And the fact that they can't talk about that or don't talk about that, or that isn't a major story because they decided to do all these things to delay their convention till late in the summer, to then, basically rework the entire election midway through the year after they shut down their own primary for the president. This is why no one has any candidates and to do debates. And the fact that the press isn't skewering the Democrats and Biden for this.
Well, I mean, I don't think it's surprising. Is it?
Let's assume for a moment the press was of the Democratic Party for a minute. That would be their proper role, right? Their proper role. All of their incentives are to care about that question because that's what drives views. That's what creates hype for the election. That's also what informs some people.
But really, I mean, we can't be surprised here. We just can't. I mean, we know that the realities are the press is an arm of the DNC, and it shows. Even though they didn't do quote unquote fact checking, you can just tell the way the questions
Did until he called them out on it.
Well, true.
Yeah, they wouldn't have said denied that. He didn't even deny that. Assumed.
Right. From you guys in terms of how the debate went, what you liked, what you didn't like, favorite moments other than the frog moment, which was
That was
peak
the best
internet.
moment.
I'd love to
that was
know.
100. There was some conversation that was going on like right before the buffering happened, and yeah, everything's like slowing down on me.
Can you close the debate stream on the TV?
Yeah, I could.
I feel like that's
That would
gotta
help.
be.
Yeah, we don't really need that anymore.
Yeah.
Let's just drop that.
Now we don't have the chat.
I am back to excellent connection. So
Okay.
I'm not.
actually, me closing that brought it to excellent connection.
Great.
So
Huh.
there was some chat going on about like the cancel culture stuff, and I remembered now my chat is broken, so I can't actually see it anymore. But Kid had made a
I mean, certainly I think Trump had that because he's a great character. He gave the media a lot of stuff to run with and gave them a perfect punching bag with which to kind of issues that we talk about day to day, and inflame a whole entire half of the country against the other half, and vice versa.
Yeah, I mean, I personally think it really charts back to the war on terror, right? The one side of the country after 9/11 was saying, if you don't support whatever the foreign policy is, you're on the side of the terrorists. The other side, what does Iraq have to do with any of this, right? And that was the conflict, and that inflamed everything. That set the stage for a lot of this. Trump is just a part of that, like an extension of that, in the sense that there was, but from the right wing, and now from a new angle. From that all increased the temperature, and it was I remember college professors who spent entire, classes just dogging on President Bush at the time.
Yeah.
That was commonplace. Because now it's just, at least then there was an institutional backing for the Bush regime, right? That there was elites that still supported him because he was in power and doing all the right things from them. Trump doesn't have any of that. So you get a much more mono narrative there, a bigger echo chamber of established, right, where people are just terrified of Donald Trump or being a Republican or whatever.
Yeah. I know that the polling numbers don't typically suggest that a vice presidential debate really moves the needle at all. Do you think, if any, which direction do you think this debate will?
I don't know if it moves the needle. One of the things is just I didn't see any kill shots. There was relatively weak criticisms and attack. I think Walz was better on attack. Like, he did more attack, and that's really critical. First, Vance was pretty good about getting hits in, but then he kind of settled into more defense towards the end there, and didn't take advantage. Like, for example, Walz in his ending statement did attack Trump while Vance didn't bother in his ending statement, which made him look nicer. But you don't win based upon being nice. You win by up someone else's negatives and keeping your positives high. And at least in the standard model, right?
Sure.
Now, what actually happens in the meme space afterwards, I don't know, right? Like, I think the knowing school shooters thing is a memeable moment. What else is there really beyond?
Well, obviously, the frog meme. The frog is going to be huge.
Yeah, right. Someone make some frog memes. We called it.
Sam.
Yeah. And then it all just kind of came in here now.
Yeah, quite true.
We're still buffering, by the way, guys. Pretty hard.
Yeah, I don't know how well the stream's doing out there for you guys. We might be losing our fidelity here. Thanks a lot, Spectrum, sponsor for tonight's buffering.
Kaylee wants us to know that American Airlines Wi-Fi is better than Spectrum.
I would not disagree. Wow. I would not disagree. Not sure we can get fiber here at the studio, but maybe we'll look into it. Any final thoughts, guys, before we?
I'd be curious what. Like, I could see by the way on all these. I feel like Vance came off more polished maybe and more, he didn't really have any flubs, and he was very crisp and precise.
Very composed.
Yeah, very composed. Did not seem nervous at all.
No.
Walz had a little bit of nerves, you could tell, and he's got kind of like a goofiness to him, but I don't think that's going to be something. And he looks like a frog. That's true. That's true. He's got a frog vote. That's important.
But Vance is emo. He's like a former.
I agree.
Guy.
I do agree with you on the eyeliner thing, Kyle. I think it was eyeliner.
It's crazy. Like, it seems like Vance has just natural eyeliner.
Just a reminder, Joe, don't let me get around to yelling fire in a crowd.
Oh, yes.
Why that's wrong.
Well, bets, but and did. It was like, oh, I misspoke. And then J.D. Vance had to come back right after that with regard to his comments on Trump previously, and he said, I've changed my mind, and I'm an adult, and I can change my mind, and and admit that freely. And that was just a 1-2 punch. I thought if there was anything even close to resembling a kill shot, it was that dichotomy.
Right, but that's like a character thing, and I think that does matter. Like, people really care about that. I do wonder, it just didn't have the feel, right? Like, this will be a clip moment that will really do it, because it's too long. But it might be a memorable one for people who watch it.
Notice was in the chat tonight. It was during the presidential debate, and he made the comment that during that prior debate that I heard from Trump, we would hear from J.D. Vance. And I think maybe we didn't nail 100% of that. There were still a lot of places where you felt I think especially he could have, touched on he was for sure better at defending himself and defending Donald Trump himself as well than Trump was. So
yeah, but Trump is more entertaining to watch.